Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews. It's, for those of you listening on YouTube or audio platforms, it is, of course, May the 4th. And therefore, it's time for us to review Indiana Jones. Very excited. We're going to be reviewing Star Wars, and I must admit, with it being how long of this I'm going to have to endure. How determined is Chris to just continue doing the Star Wars theme under my speaking? Yeah, I'm super excited about this.
Sorry,
I didn't even. You'll notice that what I started saying was just like fluff. It was just, I'm excited about this because I knew what you were going to do, and I was like, it's not worth me making any coherent points at this stage.
Dan, you're like a brother to me, but 99% of the time when you talk, all I hear is fluff. So don't worry about it.
Wow, it's a little early in the podcast.
I wasn't paying attention anyway. Let's assume that every time you talk on any podcast, in my head, all I'm doing is No, I'm sorry. That is, of course, not true. Carry on, Dan.
Oh, man.
Carry on. Star Wars.
Yeah, we're going to review Star Wars. What do I do after, you know?
Tell you what you do.
It's all right, Chris, because whenever you talk, all I'm hearing is so it's fine, evens out.
Tell me your history, Dan.
So for those who don't know, this is a podcast where we review old movies that we're very fond of, movies from our childhood mostly. We don't have like a cut-off date, but like just stuff that we remember from our youth that we love, going back to them, often trying to discover if they still hold up. Sometimes we watch a movie like this though, where we've obviously watched. This is a movie I watch very regularly, therefore I kind of knew it held up. But it's fun to break them down. It's fun to take a critical eye on a thing that you just sort of love, sort of almost indiscriminately. Like I watched this film a few months back, and I had so many more thoughts this time because I watched it with the podcast in mind, and it was interesting to think about it critically in a way I haven't done in a long time. I feel like when I watch Star Wars these days or rewatch it, it's like passive fun. I know the movie so well, I don't even think I'm actively participating in watching Star Wars. Does that make sense? I don't know if that if that's a phenomenon other people feel when they watch a film as often as I watch this film. Because I will say right now, this or maybe Empire is the film I've watched the most in my life. No question. I have seen this hundreds of times easily. So yeah, I don't think there's a film I've watched more. But we do normally start this podcast with our history of the film. I mean, my history is many people of my age's history, because we grew up in a very, very fortunate era, Chris. Because I think kids who grew up in the 80s, when Star Wars was had been such a thing that thousands of movies copied it badly. Right? So I feel like the public tone to science fiction went away. Like it turned on it a little bit. And then I feel like in the 90s when like there weren't movies like this anymore, you know, little 7-8-year-old Dan goes to a friend's house who's watching the last few minutes of it. I'm like, what is this? Like everyone, you know, the visuals of the dog fights towards the end of the movie, like I was like, what is this? I want to see this. So my mum used to rent one video a week I think it was on a Friday night, and I'd have it for the Friday night and the Saturday, and it'd go back on the Sunday. So I'd just watch it over and over again. But occasionally I would have to pick something that I would end up watching with my family. And I chose Star Wars, and I remember distinctly everyone falling asleep but me. I mean everyone. Dad, mum, sister, all asleep.
Had they not seen it before then?
No.
Wow.
To the point, Chris, where they managed to make it as far as I think the 40-ish minute mark, because they saw Han Solo, and I remember the last thing my mum saying as passing comment on the film before falling asleep was, "Oh, I thought Harrison Ford was in this. I was kind of waiting for him to show up," and then never again. And like the next weekend, they had to rent two, because they had to rent one for us to watch on the Friday night together, but they had to rent Empire Strikes Back for me because I had now seen the first one and I wanted to see the second one. The week wait, I know kids who grew up in the 70s had to wait like years. I'm aware of this, but one of the most
but they didn't.
excruciating-
To be fair, they didn't know. They didn't know necessarily a sequel was coming, whereas you knew
It was out there. Yeah. I remember distinctly the week wait between A New Hope and Empire Strike Back that was the most painful thing. The most painful thing. And the same, I guess, the other way as well after Empire waiting for Jedi, because obviously Empire ends up the cliffhanger. So you've got that. Like, I guess it was even worse for that. But I just remember itching to watch that movie, and having to wait a week was just pain. it was trauma. And then they did the re-releases, obviously, in like 1987, and that's when I finally got to own them. I had that box set that everyone had with Darth Vader's head. As being
do you get the widescreen grey one or the regular screen gold one?
I think I had the grey one.
I think that's my. I think there were two. And
there were two.
I'm trying to find. I think looking at
there was
Google,
a grey and a gold one, but I couldn't
yeah.
remember. I couldn't remember which way round it was. I have a visual.
According to this picture, widescreen was the grey silver one, and then regular was the gold.
I think that's the one I had, the grey one.
Yeah, we had the grey one.
Yeah, which I think was a bummer because I remember I think I liked the gold box visually, but I think I wanted widescreen.
Yeah,
yeah, because the other one would have been a version of Pan and Scan, I assume, which is just the worst. I assume so, yeah. Which is the worst. If anyone, for those of you who are lucky enough to be babies, star children, born probably 90s or later, you won't realise the pain of what Pan and Scan was. So very quickly, when a movie was widescreen and your TV was square before TVs went widescreen too, or popularly went widescreen, took a few years for that to take sort of hold. To fit a movie that was sort of rectangular into a square box, you had two options. One, big black bars, top and bottom, which made the image on your already small TV screen even smaller, but you got to see the whole image. Or cropped awkwardly, so it fit the full screen. You lose the edges, but exactly what you lose, top, bottom, left, right, was determined by some random editor, just some guy they hired to go through the movie and select where the camera was in each frame. And it was ridiculous. And they always made bad choices. You always missed stuff. The visuals were always ugly. I hated it. It upset me so much. I had a version of Alien that was Pan and Scan, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to watch. I think I got it as I bought it off a friend at school, pocket money sort of thing. Like he probably nicked it from his older brother. It was one of those situations. But I gave him like £1 or something, and he gave me this. And I was so excited, and it was Pan and Scan. I was so upset. I was so mad. Anyway, Pan and Scan was an abomination.
That's clear. That's coming across, Dan.
Controversial opinion, but yeah. So I think I had the silver one. But yeah, so it was one of those things where, like, I saw them on video like a couple of years before the hype train for Star Wars started to sort of build. And then obviously we had the big re-releases, special editions, which is as the films we know as they are now, with a couple of extra bits added and lots of special effects. We'll talk about it. And then those were the versions that those versions were the ones I had and grew up with, because unfortunately it was a long time until even the originals were were available again, and even then it was very limited. So yeah, I like with every other movie we've talked about on here, that's a VHS I absolutely wore to the bone, and then eventually I got them on DVD as well. And then obviously I was very lucky because it was like I got to watch the movies and love them, and just as my excitement for them were dying down, the re-releases happen, and then just as my excitement for that is dying down, Phantom Menace starts to be like promoted. So I grew up in I think people of our age specifically were part of a sort of weird Star Wars renaissance. And I think, again, the same thing will happen with the generation that have just grown up now and discovered Star Wars and then sort of ended up watching like Force Awakens and stuff. So I think we were very fortunate. We did not grow up in the desolate years. We grew up as it was rebuilding. So yeah, big part of my childhood. But I think if for most of my life, you asked me my favourite film, I think Star Wars was the answer. I love everything about it, and we'll talk about the details in a bit. But yeah, it's a big part of my childhood, extremely important film for me.
Nice. I could take it or leave it. No, I'm joking. Can you imagine? Although there is an element of it's really bizarre because I I have a huge connection to the film and memories of connection, well, to Star Wars as a thing, and memories of connection to Star Wars. But it comes more from trying to get into it because it's more about my dad because he was a big fan, or at least in my head, like he is a big fan, and we've gone to see, you know, all the newer movies together in the cinema, and that's lovely. But I guess in my head, because you amplify things as a kid, in my head as a kid, it was like he loved it, and he did love it. Enough to have a box set of, and it looks like it came out in 1995, so before the special editions.
The ones with the faces.
Yeah, the blue posters.
The first one has Yoda's face. Oh no, not the first one has Yoda's face. I think the second one has Yoda's face on it. Each one has like a big face.
No, not as far as unless the actual box did, which I can't remember. Next time I go around there, I'll have to take a picture of it. But as far as I can tell, it looks like it came out around 95-ish. So it was like a 3 VHS box set in blue. And I think the sound was remastered. But the trouble is, when I looked for it, I found similar box sets, but I don't know whether they're like the UK release, US release, whatever, because I don't remember this big old Stormtrooper which is on there. So I'll have to take a picture. But anyway, and I remember watching, and I've always been quite harsh on myself about this, because I remember watching it before the special editions and struggling with it, like the depth of it. And like I'm looking at it now and I'm like, well, to be fair to me, if that was 95, 96, I'd have only been 8 years old. Not even that, potentially. If it was 95, I was 6 years old. And there are 6-year-olds that watch it and get it, but I wasn't one of those kids. And I remember really enjoying it. In particular, certain things, the trash compactor really captured my imagination. Like, that really... And you know, as people that listen to all our stuff will know, I do have an affinity for stories about people trapped, and I know it's only like a couple of minutes, but that something about being that really caught my imagination. And then I found when the moves started to move in really scary and stuff. So I remember that in particular capturing me, and I remember Dad being really excited when he got the re-releases, and I remember, I think, giving it a go again, and again always enjoying it, but being slightly confused by who was who and some of the terminology. And then going to see The Phantom Menace and being swept up in everyone else's excitement and being excited about, because fundamentally it's why I watched a lot of Formula One, despite, you know, really never being able to get into that. You know what I mean? I was doing it because I wanted to spend time with my dad and share an interest in stuff. It was much easier with Back to the Future, although then you got sometimes with kids you then have the opposite problem where I then went overboard, and I'm like, what do you think Marty was thinking here? He's like, I don't fucking know. Like, you know, I just said you should watch this film. Like, so going to see The Phantom Menace, I understood it more. I was a bit older, and again, I'm not. People will have watched it and got it. Like, I'm not saying it's confusing. It was me. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. Who knows? I was thinking about Power Rangers, whatever. And kind of growing more with The Phantom Menace, getting a bit more into it. And then I think I talked about it before, but I remember after Revenge of the Sith came out and all 6 were available, me and some friends met up around a mate's house to watch them all. I'll never forget it, mate. His mum made pizza for us all, and I was like, fuck yeah, sweet. And then produced spaghetti bolognese. And I was like, fucking hell, pizza and spaghetti bolognese. Like, this is insane. This is like the best dinner ever. What the fuck's going on? But the crazy thing about it now, when I look back on that, is we wanted to watch all 6 films. We started at 4 p.m.
No one had done the math there, I think.
Yeah, just mathematically, what a fucking dumb idea that was. Like we got to the end of New Hope and we're all asleep because we just shouldn't have done it that way, and we did them in obviously story order. But I remember taking it in more and being like, get it more now. And at another friend's thing, playing the like PlayStation game, which basically went through the movies and again, and so suddenly like. Over time, my own more kind of genuine connection to the films grew as a result of like more exposure to it and stuff. And then again, some other friends tried to watch it and rewatched it with a friend, and then recently, literally watched it over Christmas a few weeks ago. So it's weird. If I'm being honest, my initial affinity with Star Wars came from wanting to watch it and bond with my dad.
That is very, very sweet, and I think that's probably a lot of people's like involvement in it. It's like, a family member really loved it, because it's a movie from the 70s. I say a lot of people, sorry, a lot of people our age, I should say, because again, it's a movie from the 70s. Like, what do we? What's a kid growing up in the 90s like looking that far back for? Like, usually kids have a distaste for things that are old.
and it's slightly hard, as I'm sure we'll talk about. It's slightly because I assume we didn't talk about it beforehand, but I assumed we both watched the Disney version, yeah?
I thought about digging out the despecialized version, but it seemed like more work than it was. Because I know I'm aware of the differences, so I know the original movie, I know the McClunky, I know the Disney version. The distinction is. I'm familiar enough with the movie to know the distinctions, and I don't feel like I needed to watch.
But you can also even if you weren't, you can fucking tell. Like, does it look a bit off? Yeah, that's been added by Lucas after. But anyway, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the I can't remember what I was going to say now. I will say, like, and it's hard sometimes to tell what's kind of gone. Like Boba Fett, for example, is an example where it's been added afterwards. But it is amazing, like, how layered it. Like, I watched it back this time and went, oh, I can see why I was confused, because like Imperial Empire, like Imperial Council, like it's really laid with ideas. And I know I'm kind of skipping to review, but I think it's pretty obvious we recommend Star Wars. And if you haven't seen Star Wars, you should go and watch Star Wars before listening to this. It's an incredible movie. But I've always been impressed by the imagination in this film.
Yes.
But the textures and layers and world building in the script of like referring to things to create, that people don't necessarily understand, but it's as a non 6-year-old watching it, potentially distracted. I'm like, it's they do enough. It's just world building. They don't bamboozle you with stuff. But I remember being shocked at just how much of the mythology is actually like laid in here. Like even the Emperor, which I didn't notice until recently, gets a name check. I'm like, oh shit! Like, wow, they really. And I don't think a lot of it is some. I think Lucas is lying if he says all of it's some fucking grand plan. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh, we'll come to that, but we know that he was lying as a result of a letter he sent to the creators of Lost.
Yeah, exactly. So. It's so textured, and I think more than anything, what makes this film stand out is the sheer fucking imagination. Like it does so many. Like we got spaceships, we got different planets, we got different types of quests. It's and obviously there's all the hero's journey stuff, but like it's so layered, and I think it is easy to forget that.
Yeah, and I think you're actually hitting on something that I wanted to get to pretty quickly, and I think it is that thing of when I rewatched it with a critical eye, I was noticing, as you just talked about, huge amounts of referencing to a wider world that is so irrelevant to this, and rewatching it now, with that critical eye open, and then hearing you describe a younger you being a bit confused by it, I think that's really interesting, because I think that sort of goes with my point, which I think is a film like this to a, I guess I must have been 6 or 7 when I first watched it. I think what I was blown away with was it felt like a full lived-in world where there was a bunch of bigger stuff, and I didn't know about that stuff, and I didn't need to. The characters understood the world, so I took it on face value that they were doing. They tell me that this movie in a weird way, does a terrible job of world building by one angle you look at it, because they tell you the Empire is evil, but at no point do you see the Empire doing anything other than acting as a government or a police. That I guess they they blow up planets, I suppose, which seems pretty evil, I suppose, in the end. But it's not. You don't see the oppression of the Empire. So in the early stages of the movie, when Luke's like, I hate the Empire as much as the next guy, it's like, do you? Cool. So I think if this script went through screenwriting, like a screenwriting marking system from like when we were at uni, it would probably get low marks, because it doesn't really explain a lot of itself. But what I think works about the film is that it's that old idea, isn't it, of the sublime, the idea that you're seeing a small frame of the picture, but the rest does exist. And because the characters always talked as if they knew what was going on, little 6-year-old, 7-year-old Dan was like, cool. I don't need to know what the Imperial Senate is. They're gone, and that's good for Vader, I guess. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's
and potentially you really didn't need to know.
I mean,
that's show anything.
Well, that's the thing, is like, it's like my brain never questioned those things, because it just felt like it just helped every time something like that happened, where they reference a thing that doesn't end up being relevant to the movie but just feels like weird random world building, almost like a word soup. I just sort of went with it because the film is so good at making you be invested in the personal stories. I don't care about the wider political situation here. I want Luke to succeed in beating the bad guys, and there's good guys and bad guys, and the movie makes that so incredibly clear early on. Look at the opening scene. That the music and the stormtroopers coming in. It's so clear. And Darth Vader, when he walks in and he's like breathing his own smoke and he's fully in black. Like, visually, you just inherently know who you're rooting for and who you're not in this situation. And as a result, you don't even care about the wider world. And I do sometimes wonder, we've talked recently about Donnie Darko, and we'll talk about it a lot more when we finally cover it on this, which we will at some point. You know how I talked about like the idea that he had this big complicated idea and the studio made him cut it down, and that film ends up being better for what it leaves out than the film that he eventually got to do with the director's cut, where it almost over-explains it and it's less interesting. So it's less interesting to have all the answers. I think this film might be a similar accident, because there's researching this one, there's a piece of trivia I came across that sort of said that the early draft of this movie had immense pacing issues. It was overflowing with unnecessary exposition, had very little narrative tension. The opening scene of the Empire raiding Princess Leia's ship was originally intercut with shots of Luke. I've seen these clips; they're online. Shots of Luke watching the space battle from the surface of Tatooine with his friends, which apparently killed all the suspense. A lot of the first act was a real confusing mess, randomly throwing in concepts like the Force and Vader's powers and the Death Star plans in Alderaan before they were properly explained. So they'd reference them before they'd even go to the trouble of talking about them in enough detail for you to just vaguely grasp what they are. The editor of that cut was then let go, and they brought in new editors who quickly identified these problems and fixed it by omitting much of the unnecessary exposition and rearranging the entire scenes to sort of better regulate the flow of information. They gave the movie sort of a tighter focus and an improved story structure, and a much needed faster pace. They actually got an Academy Award for their editing work on this film, and I think deservedly so. But it does sort of make me think. I go back to that Movies with Mikey thing, which is no one knows what they're doing. It's like it's pure luck. This movie, in some ways, George Lucas had all these insane ideas, and he scrambled them all into this movie, and through the foresight of some editors who kind of knew better, they trimmed it down and made it this kind of like, from an information perspective, this masterpiece, but kind of almost by accident.
Because it almost rhythmically has a load of visuals or beats that there will, and I'm not saying on any level that I, as a fucking wanky kid, was looking at it deeper than some, and I'm not saying what I'm about to describe is you, but there will be some kids that were equally as confused as me, but it didn't matter to them because the spaceships were cool, and that's
exactly
fine. And there were other films that happened for me for, just not this one. Like it's almost rhythmically. Every 10, 15 minutes, even probably more than that. Because even the Scum and Villainy Cantina is just full of interesting looking aliens, and there's battles, and even the bits where there's talking, it's often by two droids, one talking robot and a robot that squeaks. That's the thing. Every corner of this film has a bold, imaginative idea in it.
Yes,
that will capture
the film is bursting with them.
You and I talking about the trash compactor and couldn't even necessarily explain why that took us. But it's like there are films where that would be the whole, would spend 20 minutes in the trash compactor because that's all it had. Whereas in this film, it's just part of this sprawling, epic journey. Now, are there flaws? Absolutely. Luke gets over the death of his aunt and uncle pretty quickly. We'll talk about some of them. But there's also moments of subtle genius, like the one that really got me, because I was like, oh, fuck, that's so much cleverer than what you'd get in a film now. Darth Vader not killing the guy that disagrees with him. Darth Vader force choking him and then being told to let go and letting go and not killing the guy. Nowadays, you get a scene like that and it's like, oh, it's the villain, so let's have him haphazardly, like he doesn't care, kill someone, and that will show his villainy. The fucking tease of the power this man has, the fact that you don't, as an audience member, quite see just how far he could go, and are then worried and frightful for how far he could go, is fucking genius. There's all these choices, and the film is littered with choices like that, where you go, that's such a clever choice. And that, watching it with a more analytical eye, certainly on last night's watch, it was like, I loved that moment because I was like, oh, I just love that you don't push it. And the audience is left going, fuck it, especially an audience that doesn't know what the Force is, watching it completely blind. You're just like, fucking hell, this guy's pretty bad. What could he do? And
there's other things you take for granted as well, which is that that moment also kind of a bit reveals what Vader is, because it's accepted now. We understand Vader is a man in a suit, but in a world where C-3PO is a droid, he's a robot, and you see Vader, you'd be forgiven initially for thinking that before the lore is so publicly known, forgiven. And I think early audiences did have that going into the movie. That omission of an explanation of what and who Vader is leads to intrigue, because at least for again for early audiences, because you don't, he could be a robot himself, he could be a droid, you don't know. He's the big head to toe suit, not too dissimilar from C-3PO, and he's got buttons on his chest. If it wasn't for maybe the breathing and then the use of the Force, which I think Obi-Wan's explanation sort of makes you think is a very, very organic life sort of thing, you sort of can put it together. But I could absolutely understand audiences watching this movie and initially being under the impression that Vader is a robot prior to that scene. And I think that scene again also hints not because of the humanity, or not even the humanity, but just choosing to, going for it in the first place feels like a human anger reaction, and then bowing out of it also feels like a very human coming to your senses. I shouldn't just kill this guy. So, I 100% agree. And the movie's imagination is what carries it, because rewatching it now with a critical eye, I was kind of curious about it does take a long time to get going. And if this movie wasn't mind-blowingly unlike anything I'd ever seen before, I wouldn't have gripped to it so well, I don't think. Because, it's 55 minutes till they're even off Tatooine. That's ridiculous. We don't meet Han until 45 minutes into the movie.
It's a fair while, yeah. Exactly, it's a fair while till we meet Luke.
It's 18 minutes, I think, by the current cut. I think it was 16 in the in the theatrical cut, but I think it's 17 or 18 minutes now that Luke shows up in the movie. Yeah, it's a lot. and I think, again, if it wasn't such an imaginative world, I think you would struggle with the pacing a bit. For sure, because it does take a while to get to its point. But as a result, by the time you get to the Death Star, you do understand the stakes. You understand the Empire. You understand that this machine can destroy planets, and that R2 has the plans, and they're trying to get them back to people who can use those plans to stop it. So you understand the stakes by the time you get there, and because the movie takes the time to sort of slowly integrate you into it, and they could have done it with a massive info dump right up top, but it wouldn't make sense in this world. These characters live in this world. They don't need to explain who the Empire is. They know. There's no one in this world that doesn't know the situation.
That's an incredibly modern trope, though, isn't it? For a film in the 70s to not be cramming exposition down your throat is feels incredibly ahead of its time. And I think that's one way we talk about how ahead of its time Star Wars is in terms of the special effects and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, I don't think things like that, which are incredibly ahead of their time, are talked about enough.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is I'm not sure it was intentional, because by that description for the trivia, it sounds like the movie did have a lot of jargon and exposition that was trimmed to make it tighter, and might have saved it from becoming that.
Yeah,
so,
completely.
Let's taking a look at Lucas's original script might have been a much different experience.
That's true. Yeah, but originally Back to the Future was a time traveling fridge, wasn't it? So
Yeah, I mean, and this famously, there was versions of it where Luke was a 60-year-old general called Luke Starkiller. Oh no, he might have been still Skywalker when that, but then there was a villain called Starkiller, and then when this script was shooting. Just before they went to production on this film, days before, they changed it from Starkiller to Skywalker for Luke. But Han was supposed to be like a green alien. There were so many weird versions of this movie that didn't make it.
And the trouble is, it's all in the however many years it's been, it's all become folklore of even some of the stuff I'm not even sure. Do you know what I mean? I think George Lucas has just rewritten history slightly in his head and said it, and now it's like this thing.
Yeah, well, some of it he's given documents. So a few years ago he gave his original treatment for Star Wars, which is like a 14 page treatment, the one he was using to try and sell it. He gave it to two comic book writers who turned it into a comic book, and they were just going off his original document. They that's all they were, and it was completely different. I mean, I'll read you the first sentence of it, Chris, because it's been published, or parts of it have. The first sentence of his original 13 page treatment is: the story of Mace Windu, a revered Jedi Bendu of Opuchi, who was related to Uzbi C.J. Thape, a Padawan learner to the famed Jedi. And it was titled The Journal of the Wills.
Oh.
So while I do think there has been a lot of revisionism in, George Lucas's retelling of how this story came about, there have been times when he's claimed he had all 9 movies planned out before he started, and there have been times when he's claimed the very opposite. That is genuinely from an old document, and he noticed some of the words there. Mace Windu, Jedi is there, Padawan is there, and that word doesn't come up until the prequels, I don't think. It's very interesting. I mean, even the idea of the Wills, which is the title of it, the Journal of the Wills, is a concept that's been a big part of really nerdy, deep Star Wars lore for quite a long time. So it's interesting, isn't it? But anyway, sorry, carry on with your point. I interrupted you for that.
No, I was going to say let's talk characters, because I think if someone was going to say, what do you think what is the thing that jars the most? I'd potentially say the insanity of Luke, like getting over his aunt and uncle really quickly, and seemingly, at least in screen time, because I know Luke had a whole journey, but maybe we should have seen a bit of him travelling back to them on the speed cruiser, crying, and then seeing this will and determination, or some references about how part of the reason he wants to go on the quest is to get revenge against the Empire, and you know, all this sort of stuff. On screen, he doesn't really deal with his aunt and uncle's death, and more time is dedicated to him mourning Ben Kenobi, who was, you know,
who he knew for 5 minutes.
Yeah, dude he thought was crazy that lived out in the fucking six. Like, that does jar. I think they could have not... It wouldn't have taken much to put in some more references to them, or, you know what I mean, or his logic, or mourning scenes, or do you know what I mean? Like, that feels rushed in a bad way for me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, like, I think as a kid, my fansplaining was, you know, it's just determined him against the Empire. Like, you see it in his face. Like to be fair to Mark Hamill does his best to give the character pathos following the aunt and uncle's death. You know, he when he comes back to Ben and he's like, "I'm coming with you. We're gonna do this together." There's a determination to the performance that gave me enough of a thread as a child and as a young man to sort of like explain it away. But I do think on paper and in practice, in the cold hard light of a review, yeah, it does stand out that he very quickly is like on an adventure, and seemingly minutes later in a bar in Tatooine complaining about the fact that he could fly the ship himself. Why are they spending so much money on Han? And it's like, kid, like, you should be 10 minutes ago you saw the grim smoky skeletons of your aunt and uncle who've raised you.
But not even like from his point of view, his parents, like, not biologically, but they literally raised him since a baby.
Yeah,
like,
correct.
Yeah. And I know, to be fair, we don't know that. Maybe they didn't know that at that point, but yeah, it's fairly strongly indicated. It's just never mentioned again. Like I say, even like, maybe, Han and Luke are having a discussion when Han's like, "Oh, I'm off. I've got my money," and he's like, "But they're monsters. They killed my aunt and uncle without a second thought." Just something. Just bring it up again.
Because from a structure perspective, it's a brilliant choice, because it is. I mean, it's the response to the refusal of the call, right? So Luke, if we're going by the hero's journey, which for those who don't know, Lucas built this heavily around sort of storytelling mythology, basically, the hero's journey. And one of the steps in that is what's known as the refusal of the call. So, Obi-Wan says, "You must come with me if you're to learn to be a Jedi." And Luke's like, "No, mate, I'm going to go to the Toshi station and pick up some fucking power converters. I've got bullshit to deal with here on this planet, dickhead. You go fight a fucking war." Obi-Wan's like, "Oh, it's your uncle talking," all that stuff. And like,
he's like, Obi-Wan's like, "But weren't you in a scene 2 minutes ago complaining that you couldn't leave?" "Yeah, shush, shush, Obi."
Yeah, but
it's different.
The choice to kill his aunt and uncle, though, is great, because it means he gets to say no to Obi-Wan and commit to it. Because if he just went no, and then Obi-Wan went, "Oh, but come on," and he went, "All right," that would not be good storytelling. So what I do love about it is it practically speaking, frees Luke to go do what he wants to do without any responsibility back home anymore. And they even have that line, "There's nothing left for me. There's nothing left here for me anymore," which is a good line. And it allows him to do the refusal of the call and then have a good reason to still go, and an extra determination. But you're right, they don't actually take enough advantage of it, because it wouldn't take much to add a scene where he's with Obi-Wan and maybe it's towards the end when they're arriving at Mos Eisley and he sees the stormtroopers, and he almost like picks up the lightsaber and is about to go crazy, and it's Obi-Wan that like pulls his hand out and is like, there's a time for fighting and there's a time for, like something, some wise bullshit Obi-Wan stuff. A scene like that would have actually, I think, really helped.
Yeah,
because it would have shown him having to deal with the situation, but it's just he's off on his adventure. Like, it's like the script was all too aware that they were freeing Luke to go off on the adventure with the death of his aunt and uncle, and they were just like, now he's free to do what he likes, and they just like forgot it for the rest of the script, which is a shame. I agree. It is a bit of a flaw, maybe a strong word, because it is there in the subtext, I suppose. But yeah, it's definitely missing from the narrative of this film. But with that said, I don't think there's many ways I would change it, because the death of his aunt and uncle is such an important part to the following the hero's journey.
Yeah, and I will say they do some good stuff with the hero's journey and his actual character as well. Like, a lot of people moan about how whiny he is, but it emphasizes the character arc. Like,
I always hate that as well, because I think even Hamill has said about that, because people always make fun of him and go, what's it, I gotta get the power, the Tashi station to pick up some power converters, and people always quote that line at him. He's like, that line is annoying. It's supposed to be. This is his growth. I'm being a whiny teenager that then has responsibility thrust on him, and you'll see the shift in Luke's performance from that moment to when he's actually on the adventure. So yeah, I 100% disagree with that criticism. I think Mark Hamill kind of nails it, to be honest with you, because he is annoying in that moment, but he's supposed to be.
Yeah, he's meant to be. Yeah, like completely. And he probably, more than anyone, has the arc and the growth, because someone like Leia, who I also want to talk about because she's fucking badass. She's a brilliant character. She's so fully formed. She's so kick-ass, which for 1977, 73 or 77, right? For 1977, you just didn't see. There's so many countless stories of young women not seeing a female, on screen that could quite hold their own in the way that Leia could, unfortunately, at the time. And like, she's so beautifully fully formed and portrayed, and it's amazing character work from Leia. There is no A to B growth. I don't think it matters in her case, but what I'm saying is Luke, probably as whiny as you find him at the beginning, he probably has more growth than anyone in this film. Well, and obviously Han as well, because Han comes back, but yeah.
Yeah, I really thought you were about to undercut your own point then, because you were like going on about how she was a strong female role model, and she is so beautifully, and I just thought you were just going to be like, so beautiful. I was like, mate, like, no. I was like seconds from calling you out.
She is, but that wasn't the point I was making.
I agree. It's genuinely like it is. I think I must admit, when I saw this film, even as a kid, I was like, I understood the Leia character was different to other female protagonists I'd seen in other movies. I couldn't put my finger on what, but I loved the character for it. I did. Again, I don't. There's no way a 8-year-old Dan understood the complexities of women in film and how they were generally portrayed. But Leia stood out, and now as an adult, I know why. You look at Indiana Jones and all the female characters and that, or like Batman and all the female characters and that. So few of them are actually capable. They're all like all the other movies with big, sort of almost heroic male leads had very passive female co-leads, that weren't very active in the story, weren't doing stuff for themselves. And what I think is great is Leia is so active in this movie. She sets off the chain of events in question. She's the one who hides the plans in Natu. And then when we finally meet her properly in the film, after the little sort of tease that she exists at the beginning of the movie, one of the first things she does is take control of the situation. Han and Luke have gotten in way over their heads, and she's the one that gets them out of it. And that level of capability from a female protagonist, is mind-melting, especially for the 70s. It felt mind-melting in the 90s, Chris. So I can't imagine how...
There's elements of it that feel mind-melting now, because it's not done... not done in an over... Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not... the way... It's done so naturally, whereas it doesn't, even some films now that have female protagonists like this, it doesn't feel like, it feels like the filmmakers are going, hey, look, female, kicking ass. Aren't we progressive? Do you know what I mean? Whereas,
sometimes it does come across like almost too winky. instead of just sort of
don't get me wrong,
naturally the thing. Like, this character is designed to naturally be that.
Yeah, and there are still in terms of female progression flaws in this. She is only one of 2 female characters in the entire movie. Like, there are still problems, but I think just the characterization of that character is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Lucas was thinking of it though. I do think this is deliberate, because there's multiple reports, if you go through the sort of trivia for the film, of Lucas wanting to give more female representation in the movie, to the point where not that long before this was in production, he considered making Luke Skywalker a female character. And that would have been huge, truthfully.
That would have been fantastic.
It's a shame he didn't quite have the courage to go through with that. Or maybe not, courage is the wrong word, because that suggests that he chickened out, and maybe it was just, there were other reasons. Maybe it was just when he did casting, Mark Hamill stood out so well as Luke. I don't know what his reasoning was, so it's unfair for me to assume that it was lack of courage that made him go the other way. But he was clearly conscious of it. The idea that he was going to make Luke female at one point, maybe, I think reports vary on whether Leia existed in that version of the script or not. So you'll have to forgive me on not knowing for sure where this came in the line. I don't know if he tried making Luke a female, couldn't make it work, and then added Leia, which, or whether Leia already existed and he was going to have a second, female character that was actually the protagonist, and make Han sort of the only male character in the trio. I'm not sure, but either way, the result is extremely subtle but very effective. Like, he really does make Leia a pivotal character, both in this movie, but also in, like, I think in progression for women in film. I think she's such a strong character, and not in the way people say that when they say that these days. I mean, she is so proactive in this movie. She makes the boys look like fucking idiots, and that's great.
It's brilliant.
And that's so bold for the time. And also, God love her, Carrie Fisher just kills it. Like, she's so good in this film. Actually, I think the cast top to bottom are amazing in this film. I'll talk a little bit about Harrison Ford in a minute, who I think was born for this role, because I don't actually think Harrison Ford is like a particularly amazing actor. I think Harrison Ford is good, but he's good at being Harrison Ford, and Han Solo is the role that he was born to play, and I mean that. So, look, I love Indiana Jones. That'll come up on here at some point, I'm sure. Another sort of fun adventure movie from my childhood, but I don't have the same connection to it as I do this. But let me tell you, like, Indiana Jones ain't got nothing on Han Solo and how perfect the 2 characters, the character and the personality of the real man meet. It's so incredible. But while we're here, like, Carrie Fisher, and I saw a list. It's not in my triv because there's so much triv, but there was a huge list of names, an absolutely massive list of names that were up for that role, and none of them would have done it as well or with the same sort of. You know what? That she brought an authenticity to her authority that I don't think the other actresses in question could have done. I think Farrah Fawcett was one of the other names I saw. Like, I just don't think anybody could have brought the immediate authority to it. Like, Leia's in command the second she's on screen, and you believe it. And there are so many other actresses from the time who had been so typecast in other roles. I don't think they could have, they were so set with what they were allowed to do in screen. I'm sure they'd have brought that baggage with them. Not their fault, obviously. That's the patriarchy at work. But they'd have brought that baggage with them to this performance, and it would have dampened it somewhat.
It's one of the most subtle performances, in a way, in the film.
Yeah.
And I think I agree with what you said earlier. Mark Hamill does a fantastic job. In those scenes, though, where he's trying to portray the character's grief, and I blame the script more than him, you can see that he's trying to portray the character's grief. Whereas
yes,
the way Carrie Fisher, like, take the medals, the look she gives Han and the look she gives Luke, it's so beautifully subtle. It's like when she looks at Luke, she's saying, yeah, I should probably, I have great affection for you, but it's affection. And she looks at Han with this subtle kind of, oh, I fucking hate you, but part of me wants to jump you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
and that's not me making, I've chosen something specifically that is related to. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not deliberately picking the moment related to her feelings for a man, but like it's a good example of like the subtlety of the performance, the way she interacts with the way she interacts with Darth and who's the general, the commander,
Tarkin.
Tarkin. The way she interacts with Darth and Tarkin is another good example of she's
disdain.
being strong and being feisty, but is also scared. You can see both in those performances. You can see that she's not going to give up the rebel home base, but that doesn't mean that she's not scared as well. And there's a subtlety and a nuance to her performance throughout, in those examples and countless others, which is just, I think it's probably the best acting in this film.
Yeah, it's really up there. Like yeah, it probably is. Like on balance, it's a bit of a toss up for me between her and Han. But I think if we're saying best acting, I feel like a lot of what makes Han work is that it's just Harrison Ford in a lot of ways. So I guess that's not really acting.
Yeah,
so mean to say, but it's true. So yeah, I guess by default, like in that, if I'm comparing those two, who are my two favorite performances from the movie, yeah, she wins. Like she's incredible, and she does such a good job. And also in reference to your, I don't mean to frame this as how she reacts with a man. She doesn't interact with any other characters, Chris. They're all men. Like I just want to remind you that you're describing this actress's sort of approach to how she performs in relation to other characters. Yeah, you're gonna have to pick scenes where she's with men, because at no point does she share the screen with a female.
No, but it was more that specifically the example I was giving was about her, like potentially the insinuation that she wanted to be with Han. Like I didn't.
Yeah,
want
but
to,
it's but that's. I mean, it's good acting.
Thing.
She sold that. Like she's and it's she sold it well, and she almost manages to sell that kind of brotherly affection for Luke in this. There's obviously the kiss, but in other scenes. You like when she first meets him, when he first comes in.
Oh, do you mean the kiss on the cheek before?
Yeah, before they
do the thing. Yeah.
Before
they spin over the gap.
Yeah. With the exception of that, which you could put as a for luck sort of situation, because it's on the cheek, like it doesn't come across particularly sexual. The rest of this movie, you do get the vibe that that Luke is this sort of like charming brotherly figure to her.
Yeah.
Like and look, I don't think that was planned yet. I don't think they knew what they knew yet. That part I do think Lucas figured out later.
Yeah, completely.
But she still brings so much to the performance, and particularly in the ways that she interacts with the other characters. And because of the subtlety you were talking about, it becomes authentic. Because people are subtle. People aren't always overt because they're often trying to disguise what they actually feel. That's the one thing that sometimes makes bad acting, I think, is when you make it so obvious in your face what your character is thinking, and you just go, well, why would that person make it so obvious what they were thinking in that moment?
And why would the person they're talking to not realise they feel that way?
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. So, you're right. Carrie Fisher may very well be the best, and I think is the best performance in this movie, because it's clear Alec Guinness doesn't give a shit. I mean, he's amazing, and it's crazy to me that somebody who does not give a fuck about this movie beyond the paycheck could give such a good performance, but you can still see a little bit of like, why am I saying this dialogue? What are any of these words? There's that the whole time Alec Guinness is on screen. Yeah. To be fair, Peter Cushing's really given a good go at it as well, actually. Peter Cushing is clearly reveling in the villainy. So there are. I mean, it's got a really good cast, top to bottom, really, the film. To be fair, but yeah, I think we're right. I think we're agreed that Carrie Fisher is the standout.
I agree with you about Harrison Ford and Han as well. It just feels so perfect, and it just it's such a shame to think of him making the same decision for Emilia Clarke just a few years prior. But I'm joking. I don't want to get to like it's not fair to you. Can't judge this movie obviously on the movies around it. Although I will say this movie makes Rogue One stand out even more, because Rogue One perfectly complements and leads into this movie, whereas something like Solo shines for slightly contradicting it or, spoiling it a little bit because it spoils Han's turn early if you watched it in chronological order.
Doesn't make Rogue One any better. Sorry, for those who don't know, I can't stand Rogue One. It's pretty awful. I think if it wasn't for the Star Wars stuff, that movie doesn't work at all on any level.
Fair enough.
That movie functions as a nostalgia piece and nothing more. It's spectacle and, it ties into that movie, but the characters are flat, the story doesn't work. It's the characters make weird decisions to get them to a specific place because that's where they need to be for the ending of the movie to work. And while that final act is spectacular, that movie functions on almost no other level. Anyway, carry on. Sorry, I
don't know what to do now. I don't know whether to try and defend my point and take us down a Rogue One rabbit hole or
because your point wasn't necessarily. Your point was just about like Rogue One does tie into this movie well, which that part I have no disagreements with.
And much better than Solo does.
100%, 100%. From that very specific angle, Rogue One does its job.
Yeah.
So we're agreed on that.
So I can't remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, so Harrison Ford. So yeah, I just think it's it's just so much fun, isn't it? And I think you need him to balance it. Luke's going through his whiny arc. Leia is kick-ass and so obviously the good guy. The bad guys are so obviously the bad guys that you need Han to flip between the two. And again, what a clever decision to have a rogue character that is a good guy, but also a bit selfish and has kind of character flaws in the middle of, this world that's very good and evil. And a lot of films just did the good and evil thing and didn't bother with the nuance. Again, like chuck a clever script decision that feels incredibly modern in a world where lots of movies were these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, and they're going to fight.
Do you think, on that point, do you think that the reason a film like this, you go, oh God, it almost feels modern, is because this movie did that? People's tastes shifted that way and movies started copying, because people always say to me like, oh, Citizen Kane, is it the masterpiece? Like I've genuinely been asked a few times, like Citizen Kane, when it comes to reviewing movies, people always say, should I watch that? Like it's supposed to be this masterpiece. And my answer is often probably not, because what was great about Citizen Kane, a lot of the things that Citizen Kane did that were revolutionary and incredible are now very standard things in movies. You've seen them many, many, many times. It will not stand out to you. Or, okay, you should watch it for historical importance, and it is a very good film, but it won't blow you away the way it did its original audience, is probably the fairer way to phrase that. Because the stuff that blew people away about the way Citizen Kane was made was so good and so revolutionary. Everyone did it after that, and it's now part of our cinematic language, right? Even simple things like choosing to put the camera in a place that tells you something about the story, which now is like common. You shoot heroes from certain angles, shoot villains from certain angles. You can give the idea that you can give the impression that somebody's looking down on someone by shooting from a high angle. You did all that stuff. That's Citizen Kane. That stuff doesn't happen until Citizen Kane happens, right? So when I look at Star Wars, I guess my question in reference to that is, when you say things like, oh, this strong female character like Leia feels very modern, Han Solo being a sort of more grey character in a very opaquely sort of black and white, otherwise black and white world, and now that's something that feels very modern, something that films do. Do you think that Star Wars got there first and inspired that, or do you think that he was just ahead of where it was going anyway? Like, I feel it's maybe a bit of both, but like, yeah, I was just curious to what you thought.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, but it almost feels like it inspired it when those kids grew up and started making content themselves that were watching it. Do you know what I mean? Because it's,
rather than the filmmakers at the time being inspired by it.
Yeah, because when I think of the rogue character that wants to be good but has some negative character traits kind of thing, I think of literally examples from the last 20 years, not examples from the 80s and 90s. So it's odd, because I think I think there's you could throw a stick and find a way in which this film inspired things and changed things, and I think that is one of them. But it feels like it took a bit of time to truly get there. Do you know what I mean? Like how many decades and years are between Mad Max Fury Road and Star Wars, you know?
Yeah. Is there a reason we're throwing a stick and not a rock?
Yeah, because sticks are longer and wider, so it can hit more things, and there's many things to hit. I'm not interested in violence, Dan. I want to just chuck a gentle stick. I don't want to knock ideas and people down with heavy duty rocks.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I think you're right. I think that's good logic. We want to throw a stick. Sticks are better. They hit more things, and they're less likely to cause serious injury. I think.
I really thought when you said, "Yeah, I'm on board with that," I think that's good logic. You were talking about the point I made about that, not just the stick answer.
It's a bit of both, Chris. It's covering both bases.
The analysis was shit, but I like how you defended that rock thing.
Yeah, you had that answer real quick. It was almost like while you were talking, your brain went, "Shit, did you say stick, not rock?" The saying is to throw a rock and you hit something, isn't it? And then you went, "Shit, notice. Start constructing a defense in case Dan picks up on it." Start constructing, because you had it instantly.
There's just some things you don't.
So from a story,
you're getting wrong.
From a story structure perspective, to sort of get at it, I think this movie is kind of fascinating because, again, on paper, pacing wise, it doesn't work. The first act takes far too long to get us to where it gets us. By conventional standards, yet somehow it works. And I think the explanation is that it's almost good that it takes so long to get going, because if the plot was going while you were trying to figure out what the fuck is going on in the world of Star Wars, you'd probably reject it outright. Because if we were immediately Luke and Obi-Wan off on their adventure. Let's not use the word immediately. I reckon you could do a version of this movie where Luke and Obi-Wan are off with Han, heading to Alderaan with the plans. 15, 20 minutes in? Instead of 50. And yeah, I think definitely. The problem you would have if you did that version of this film is you wouldn't have had enough time to acclimatize to the world and the imagination of the world and like how different it is to everything else you've ever seen ever. And you'd be way less invested in any of it, I think.
Yeah, because I think even quicker than that. Like you could have them land, they're found by Luke, and then they get attacked, and Obi-Wan Kenobi saves them, read the message, away we go. Like, you know what I mean? But you've got to set up the aunt and uncle. You've got to world build. But I think the reason it works, though, is because of what we were talking about earlier. Whilst it feels slow, it's still two fucking robots chatting to each other. One chatting, one beeping. It's still this great laser fight on a spaceship. It's still, people selling robots and talking about speed cruisers, and you know what I mean? It's
yeah.
Whilst it is slow paced, we keep using the word, but the imagination is just all over it.
Which is, I think, was my point. Yeah, like that's what carries the film through that period that I think would otherwise potentially be, if the movie didn't have that level of imagination, you would think the opening 50 minutes of this movie were pretty boring. You'd be like, get to the point. Do something. You'd be poking it with a stick. But
maybe that's why...
Go on.
Maybe that's why as a kid I found it a bit confusing and a bit of a slog, because to me, I was watching Power Rangers. I'd seen robots. I'd seen monsters. Do you know what I mean? Right. So like it didn't hook my particular imagination at that point, because I was, like you said, I was getting it from all the things that were inspired by Star Wars. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But obviously watching it like as an adult, you really appreciate that. Well,
that's what's interesting as well. Is I think we sort of grew up in a weird era where there were things inspired by Star Wars, but still nothing quite like the exact copies were gone. Like, so when I sat down to watch Star Wars, it's incredible to me how unique Star Wars felt in the 90s. I understand and would always have understood why this movie was like this crazy masterpiece in the 70s that like the minute the first shot hit the screen, the little ship being chased by the big Empire ship and the visual effects, but everyone clapped and cheered and went mad for it. I totally understand in the 70s why that works. I don't, and will probably never be able to explain to you, Chris, why that still worked for me as an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old or whatever in sort of 95 when I saw it. I still don't really. I should have been absolutely, I should have been like, yeah, right.
Do you
cool.
think
Space
it's
battles,
because
what's
you were
new?
getting? Do you think it's because you were getting the context? Because like no one watching it from the 90s onwards, from the 90s to now, like chances are that's not the first time you see Darth Vader. That's not the first time you've seen R2D2 and C3PO, because you have grown up
with that imagery in the
those
cultural
images.
sort of lexicon. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're like, oh, this is fucking it. Oh shit.
Yeah, see, I think it's a little bit different now, though, because I mean, in the 90s, there's no internet, right? So I might have seen it. I might have seen it on like in a magazine or a newspaper or maybe in an advert or something. But realistically, where would I have seen the imagery of Star Wars prior to sitting down to watch it the first time, other than maybe flicking through the TV channels and seeing it?
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah, because I thought that too. Because I was trying to think, like, did I have any memories of this? The only thing that I think I went into this movie knowing visually were R2D2 and C3PO. Yeah, I don't even think I knew what Darth Vader looked like until I sat down and watched this movie.
Maybe that's different for me because of my dad's affection for it.
Yeah, whereas my family had no
those
interest.
References. Yeah.
So I never come across it until I saw it, until I was watching it. And it's also worth noting, I guess, my family were asleep after 50 minutes of this movie. So maybe all the stuff we're saying isn't at all a problem. Might be for some. Maybe the slow pacing and the all the exposition is. But yeah, I feel it. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because it almost... it sounds really weird, but you almost don't hear... And it's an incredible feat of the franchise. You almost don't hear... It's certainly when it comes to the original movies, not the later movies, although that's fans having this debate. It feels to me like there's two camps. There's people that have never seen it and have this weird pride on it. Oh, no, I've never seen Star Wars. Like, okay, cool. That doesn't make you, like, whatever. Doesn't mean you should fucking, I don't know, run for mayor because you've never seen Star Wars. Okay,
I think that's a great campaign. Vote for me. I've never seen Star Wars. Yes, you got my vote. You fucking weirdo.
And then there's people that love it. You don't hear a lot of, I watched it, gave it a shot, didn't like it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and obviously there are people that don't like the later films, but again, they're fans of the franchise that don't like the later films. You don't hear a lot of, sat down, watched all the original trilogy. Meh, kind of like the way we are, or at least I historically have been. Again, I want to rewatch them and maybe change my mind with Lord of the Rings. Just like, yeah, watched it, cool, not for me. Never mind. Like, you don't hear a lot of that with Star Wars.
Yeah, you definitely don't hear a lot of it. It probably exists. I mean, it has to, right?
Yeah,
like non-science fiction sort of fans in general, people who just aren't really interested in that sort of thing.
But maybe that's a cultural thing.
There are people who are sort of, they find it hard to connect to a world so far from their own. And those people, they're not into Lord of the Rings, they're not into Star Wars. Anything so that far removed from our reality, they find it hard to invest in. Those people must exist.
Maybe that's a culture thing, because those people haven't bothered watching it because they know they don't like it, in the way that I think it probably exists with Marvel. But Marvel's so known and such a thing. Like, one of my cousins has never seen any Marvel movie because he's like, I just don't like superhero movies that much. But he saw Spider-Man because that came out, his mates wanted to watch it, etc., etc. So do you know what I mean? Because it was like the 70s, those people probably exist that remember it from the 70s, but anyone since is like, it's not my thing, so I'm not going to watch it. Maybe that's why you hear less of it. I still think those people definitely exist, but because it's so iconic, they're not. There's no way for them to be tricked, and there's no way for them to have, I've equally got friends that aren't into superhero movies that have still seen the Marvel movies because their partner is and wants to go to the cinema with someone to watch it.
Yeah.
Whereas with Star Wars, because it came out in the 70s and the choice is watching it on streaming or VHS, it's harder to be like, no, you've got to Come on,
Yeah,
we're watching it.
There's
although
no reason to
obviously
go back.
A lot
to
of people
it if you're
do
not
that.
yeah, there's no reason to go back to it if you're not interested. I think
Yeah.
as well, it's also very telling that obviously in the 70s, like science fiction was very dead. It was considered a very niche interest. The studios all turned this movie down prior to Fox picking it up. Because they just were like, there's no money in science fiction. They're expensive to make, and they yield very little return. And even Fox, prior to the movie's release, once it was being made, were convinced it was going to be a flop, and like downplayed the marketing where they could, try to save money here and there, because they really didn't want to. They really didn't want to spend a lot of money on this movie that was guaranteed.
Well, that's why they didn't have the. That's why they didn't have the toys, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why exactly why the toys weren't ready yet, because no one thought anyone would give a shit. And then when Kenner got the contract, and it was like suddenly it was this huge thing, and there was all this demand, it was too late to put them into production. So famously, I mean, most people listening probably already know this, but famously, Kenner sold empty boxes for Christmas that year, that you would then, you'd give that to your child on Christmas Day so they could open it and see a box with Star Wars in it with empty spaces for the figures, and then the figures were essentially. You would get them in the mail at a later date, or pick them up from the toy store. You bought it. You'd take your box back and they put them in. I don't know how exactly it worked, but famously that Christmas, no one had Star Wars toys. They just had empty boxes. And I know that's another point on George Lucas being a genius. I mean, it's in the trivia, but while I'm on that subject, he took a very, very low salary in this movie in exchange for the merchandising rights, and it was considered a very foolish move by the Fox. Were just like, idiot, he's going to get no money on this, and the toys actually became one of the biggest. The merchandise in general became one of the biggest money earners of Star Wars in general. So yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's
like
genius.
The foresight that George Lucas had. So yeah, getting back to the sort of more specifically the movie rather than sort of generally the structure of the film, I do think those first sort of 40-50 minutes are maybe pacing wise a bit odd, but like you get away with it because again it's such an imaginative world. You're really enjoying being introduced to everything slowly, particularly Han Solo. When he finally hits the screen, you feel like, oh god, like you don't mind that you waited for him. It almost feels like the movie was building to the Han Solo reveal. Like it's weird because it's almost like the movie knows how much you're gonna like that character. And it works really well. And by that point, you're pretty invested in the overall what's going to happen with these plans and stuff. Then the whole sequence, obviously getting trapped in the Death Star. I mean, like it's so funny now watching it with a critical eye how much this has inspired other Star Wars stuff. As I thought. To like the sort of the tropes of Star Wars, and I was thinking through like the Clone Wars, Rebels, and the Mandalorian. The spin-off media that's come from this movie. How many episodes of the Clone Wars or Rebels were about rescuing someone from a place where they were trapped by villains? So many, so many.
It almost features in every film as well.
It's so much about rescuing one of the heroes from the clutches of the villains. I don't think I realized how much of a trope that was until I was taking a look at this with that critical eye. The Mandalorian, like so many of those episodes are about that. Are about going into a place you're not supposed to be going to, where the odds seem stacked against you. There are so many of the enemy. You're going to be kind of trapped with them. How do you get out of that? And it's almost weird to me that at this point that even ever feels like a threat. Because in the world of Star Wars, the heroes have done that so many times. Like in Rebels, the amount of times characters in Rebels get caught by the Empire and then have to be rescued is ridiculous. The idea that you would take the Empire seriously as a threat is mad.
Well, speaking of their threat,
here
then,
it is.
It
first movie?
Because I think it's in the Honest trailer, which I watched last night. Watched again last night, and they describe, or maybe it was in CinemaSins, something described the ball on the Death Star that you see like threateningly move into where Leia's captured as a truth serum, and some describe it as like a torture device. Which is it in your reading, Dan?
Yeah, I always figured it was a torture device.
Yeah, same. Because if it's a truth serum, it's presumably shit. So I just assumed it was a torture device.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, I never really. I mean, I guess I have seen the truth serum thing before, but I've always kind of dismissed it.
But it's a good example of like if that thing didn't work? Is it because Leia's kick-ass? Is it because actually, the deaths, like you say, it's not actually a threat being captured? Because
the movie actually, to be fair, covers themselves because they have the moment where Vader goes, right, she's not telling us, we're just gonna kill her. And it's at that point the Falcon shows up and he's like, they're trying to return the plans to her. She might be useful yet. Let's keep her alive a little bit longer. And they just about justify why they didn't just murder her on sight. Which, by the way, this is the only movie in which the Stormtroopers' guns are set to stun mode ever in this franchise. It's in the early, for those of you who remember, in the early scene, Leia tries to escape the Stormtroopers and they shoot her with this weird circular blast from their blaster. It's some sort of stun mode. It sort of puts her to sleep. Literally never comes up again in how many movies and TV series?
Yeah, but that's because they don't need it. They don't need it to come up again because from this point onwards, the Stormtroopers just miss.
Well, that's. I mean, it's a very popular joke, but it never fails to make me laugh when Obi-Wan is talking about the attack on the Sand Raiders, and he's figured out that it was really the Stormtroopers making it look like an attack on the Jawas, and the Stormtroopers have tried to make it look like the Sand people did it. But Obi-Wan sees right through it, and one of his reasons for seeing right through it is these are too accurate for the Sand people. Only Imperial troops are so precise. I wrote that line in my notes and just wrote after it, lol. Yeah, because this whole movie is it's an entire movie of Imperial troops missing. I don't recall them hitting a single thing in this movie.
It's an entire franchise of that. So that's a question. Do you think, obviously just talking about this movie, do you think they're threatening?
Do I think who's friends? Sorry.
The Stormtroopers.
The line keeps breaking up. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that one more time?
The Stormtroopers. Do you think the Stormtroopers are threatening in this movie?
Oh, threatening. I thought you said, are they friends? Because it stopped breaking up now, but it was breaking up the line. Because for those who don't know, Chris and I record these over the phone. I thought you said, do you think they're friends? I was like, what? The Stormtroopers? Han and Luke? What are you talking about? Threatening.
You were just like, mate, watch Rebels if you're that fucking bothered about whether they're friends.
Yeah.
Threatening.
No, I don't think they are. I think...
No.
They start a little bit threatening, but very quickly they become not threatening in this movie. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that's fine because it's an adventure movie, isn't it? It's not supposed to be a horror movie. I think it's okay that they're sort of a mild inconvenience rather than an outright threat. It's sort of...
they're also not... They're the putties in Power Rangers, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? They're the henchmen. They're not the villain.
Yeah, exactly. They're there to be an obstacle, not to be the thing that defeats the hero. The hero is above the henchman always, and I think that's fine. They're there to make difficulty for them, and that's what I think is good about it is the way they use the Stormtroopers in this film. It sometimes is just them shooting at them, but often it's them causing them other problems. So the sequence where Luke and Leia get stuck on that platform and he has to sort of swing across. That's a problem caused by the fact they're being chased by the Stormtroopers. So the Stormtroopers have made it difficult for them. They're not necessarily a massive threat to their lives. And then, of course, then they're sometimes used for comic relief too. There's the scene where Han charges around that corner head first, which is remains one of my favourite scenes in the whole movie, which is Han just so gung-ho, such a perfect encapsulation of his character, but also such a great joke. He runs around that corner, chasing after the Stormtroopers, shooting at them, and then he turns the corner, and there's about 1,000 of them, which has been changed in this cut, I'm aware. I know in the original there was 10 of them. They've added CGI Stormtroopers out of the wazoo, but the joke still works where he goes around that corner, there's loads of them, and then he turns and then he comes back round the other way yelling as if he was the same way he was yelling as he went after them. He comes back.
It's
so
a great
good.
joke. It's a great joke from Han's perspective. I don't really understand. Do you think they sell it because they sell him going, oh fuck it, fine, quite well? Do they sell the Stormtroopers going, oh shit, and running away? That element of it has never really rung with me.
I guess unless the logic they're thinking is, we know there's a big group of us around this corner, we're gonna go for strength in numbers, so this guy's gonna just shoot us out of being crazy. But yeah, again, it doesn't help you build the threat of the Stormtroopers, does it? If they if they're seen literally running away from the hero. But there's a history of this in Star Wars, though. I mean, it's for, and not to use Phantom Menace as an example for much, but the Trade Federation droids are comically bad at their job too. Roger, Roger. They're played for laughs more often than not. And even in this movie, the stormtroopers are not taken particularly seriously. And then historically, like in Star Wars, they're often played as like just joke guys to blow up or whatever. There's a long history of that in the franchise, and it comes from this one. So yeah, I think they're fine. I don't think it's a problem necessarily that they're not threatening. I mean, you didn't? I assume you didn't find them threatening by the tone of the question.
No, I didn't, but I think I probably did as a kid. Like, I was quite struck by on this watch in particular how they are more obviously not robots than I remember them being as kids. Like, do you know what I mean? Like the conversations and stuff, and the way they talk, and certainly like Han like being like, "Oh no, we're fine here, don't worry," and them having like a human conversation with him, like they presumably would the stormtrooper that was meant to be there, and them kind of taking the costumes and stuff. Like, I was really, again, it's another big element of the series that is layered in here as well.
It is, and I will say, for people who've sort of talked about recent Star Wars movies negatively, and one of the criticisms being they're too funny or too leaning on this is a funny movie. There's some great jokes in this movie. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that Han one, just we're fine. Like, that really cracked me up.
Yeah, it's great, so and like, even like when they call in the stormtroopers and knock them out, or Han going around that corner and then coming back the other way, like it's a movie full of laughs. Like, and I don't think it's unintentional. I mean, it's very known that the things that mostly inspired this movie were, our good friend Joseph Campbell, and his work with the hero's journey, and looking specifically at like ancient storytelling techniques and the monomyth. That stuff, massively influenced. Like Hero with 1,000 Faces massively influenced Lucas's storytelling structure, but he was also massively inspired by those old like serials, the Buck Rogers of it all and all that stuff. Like those sort of kind of cheesy, sort of science fiction stories and they were also quite funny. They didn't take themselves very seriously, and this movie obviously takes itself more seriously than that, but it still feels there is a lot of levity in this movie, and some of it is sort of more slapsticky, maybe, like seeing R2-D2 get shot and like fall over and make funny noises is kind of, I guess, for the kids, but there is also a lot of like that Han moment where where he's awkwardly like, everything's fine here, how are you, is I think funnier for adults. I don't know if I laughed at that as much as a kid.
I think it's incredibly balanced. Here. It's incredibly balanced, and certainly, especially maybe in the original trilogy, probably the most balanced of all of them. Like, I've heard arguments that Empire is too dark for kids, and I've heard arguments that Jedi Return of is too light and
Yoda is in Empire. Yoda. Yoda's a funny character in Empire.
Yeah, no. And we'll talk about it more when we get there, but I've heard those opinions.
Yeah,
I haven't heard that. You don't hear that with this one because the balance is undisputably there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would say as well that the balance is maybe off in later movies. Like the prequels, I think the balance is off because it's not just a balance of comedy to drama, it's also the balance of what kind of comedy. And it's very clear that when The Phantom Menace tries to be funny, it really does aim at the younger market. Jar Jar making his tongue numb because he's gotten it stuck in that front thing of the pod race is and Jar Jar.
Yeah, I think
an alien farting near Jar Jar and him going "Piusa" is aimed at children, and you wouldn't get a joke like that in this movie. I don't think
the best balance of the later movies is Force Awakens. I think that had that echoed this in its kind of
tone and approach to comedy. Yeah, agreed. But this is a funny movie, and it doesn't get enough credit for that. I don't think. I think it is, but it's got some really good gags in it, and even more serious moments find humor intentionally so. I don't think it's an accident. Like, I don't like you. Oh no, sorry, he doesn't like you. I'm sorry about that. I don't like you either. That's funny. Like, that's a good line. Yeah. It's amusing.
Completely.
So yeah,
and it's also incredibly suspenseful. Like the whole final battle, where there's the constant ticking clock of when when the Death Star is going to align with the planet. Against this battle that's taking place on the Death Star to try and kind of hit the target. Mm-hmm. It's masterfully done, and it really works when, again, structurally, a lot of the time, like you don't often find a big climatic battle like that takes place in like a completely different setting with new characters do you know what I mean? Like, it switches in those last 20 minutes to be this spaceship battle.
Yeah, it really earns the title there, doesn't it? Star Wars. It's a proper like old school dogfight.
Yeah, and it's more like you look at something like, say, The Avengers, like the battle takes place in New York with the heroes that we've spent the entire movie with, and they've spent quite a bit of time by that point in New York. This literally, the people getting killed in this battle are characters that we've only known for like 10 minutes, like, and it's really
and in the original cut,
works.
And in the original cut, Chris, not even that. The first version of this movie I saw doesn't have the scene where he meets Biggs.
Exactly. And that's a really clever, vital scene because it adds a bit of weight to the other characters.
Yeah, that's a good addition.
Yeah, it's a great addition.
We should, on that subject, we should probably talk about some of those additions.
Yeah. No, okay. Yeah.
No, sorry. You want to finish the point? Sorry, I didn't realize I'd derailed you. Carry on.
No, we've not really spoken much about that last battle, so I thought we were going to do that for a bit, but we can do it.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what you would. I think it is brilliant because for all the reasons you said, it's such a different sort of climax. The climax being a very different format to the rest of the movie is a genius idea. It does bring a lot of excitement to it. The hand moment coming in is great. The catharsis of where it all ties together, where it's where we've got Luke finally sort of letting himself go with the Force and hitting something they've established is really hard to do. And also already it's genius to have chosen to have somebody fail to do it before him, because it reestablishes how hard this shot is to make. And then him turning off his computer and trusting it and making the choice to do that. Because there's a version of this script, I think, where after the ships shoot from behind, his computer dies. And you go, oh no, how's he going to do it? And then he trusts in the Force. But Luke chooses to turn off the computer.
I love that they show us the reaction of the people in the control room that are just like, he's turned off his computer. Like, it just, again, just creates momentum. And just a lot of kind of energy.
And visually, it's incredible. I mean, with the exception of the shots that have been added more recently, we'll come back to, all the original like model work is so good for this sequence. And when they were working out the angles and how to shoot it, they looked at old war films to sort of look at how those dogfights were shot, and sort of went along with sort of like the approach that was taken there, and as a result, it does feel very visceral in this movie in particular.
You say, it really earns its title. The only thing, and this is maybe an addition thing of the earlier scene, and it will lead us nicely into that. The only thing is, how come when they destroy Alderaan, it's quite quick to load up that gun and fire it, but in this sequence, it takes like a whole, even when it's aligned and ready, it still takes them ages to get to a point where they're ready to fire it.
I like to think with Alderaan, they were like prepped for hours. They were just like, guys,
fair enough.
warm it up. we're going. So
Fair
that it's what do you call it? Tarkin comes in. He goes, right, guys, I'm gonna do this whole dramatic thing later. I'm gonna bring Leia in. I'm gonna be all evil and sinister, and I'm gonna blow up her planet, right? But I know this thing takes ages to warm up. So can you guys start now? And then I'm gonna bring her in and act like I'm just giving you the order. Like, just everyone get it ready, but act like that's not what you're doing, right? Act natural. Act cool. No, not you. No, stop doing that. That's not natural. Everyone else, chill. Get it ready. I'm going to bring her in about, 40 minutes? 50? 55. Okay. 55 minutes. I'm going to bring Leia in.
There's someone just holding a lever. Like, Jeff, keep hold of that lever, Jeff. No.
I'm bringing her in. Shh, everyone, shh. She doesn't know. Shh, stop it. Stop laughing.
That's fair.
That's how I imagine it went down.
That's a good explanation for it. But yeah, it's epic, and so.
I have a slight criticism of the scene as well, though, Chris. To be honest with you, you had your criticism, which is how long it takes for that to go. My criticism of the final dogfight is I will never get over the fact the fat guy is called Porkins ever.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
I don't know what the deal is there. I don't know if that's an accident. I don't know if that's. It doesn't feel like an accident, that's for sure.
No.
No, not acceptable. Not acceptable.
It doesn't at all, and it is really, truly unacceptable. It always reminds me of, apparently, there was, I will make this quick, but it is insane. James Corden, in his younger British acting days, was in a British soap opera called Hollyoaks. And they wanted him to play the stereo, they were being, it was horrific. They wanted the character, Dan, to have posters of burgers and chips on their wall, like other people had posters of movies and women they fancied.
Wow.
They wanted the character to have posters of food up on the wall.
Yikes.
Just appalling. And calling the character Porkins and keeping the character's name as Porkins after you've, cast. And even the way, just the whole Porkins is not handled well.
No. Justice for Porkins.
Yeah, complete justice for
Porkins.
Let's do additions. And can you talk for at least 2 minutes while I quickly nip to the loo because I had a massive cup of tea? Apologies.
You do it. Absolutely do it. I think that the movie's it's a mixed bag, I think. I know a lot of people like to rag on the additions, and there are a lot of very bad additions. McClunky is a bad addition. Greedo shooting first is a bad addition, although it turns out that's actually when they went to re-rate the movies in 97 when he was doing the re-edit, he was going to get a higher rating, a higher on the was it the MRP, whatever it's called, the board of certification they have in America. We're going to give him we're going to restrict the movie to not being available to children. Well, admittedly, it was a home release, so it wouldn't have really changed much. But that was a change they requested, so that's why he's claimed different things over the years, but apparently that's the real reason. But so some changes are bad. That's very bad. The insertion of the Jabba the Hutt scene, totally unnecessary, not good. Stands out a mile. They had to edit it weird because originally a guy played Jabba the Hutt, so Han walks over his tail in a really janky way. If you can't make it work, don't make it work. Don't try and make it work and reinsert that scene. I do like the inclusion of the big scene because I think the big scene is really nice. It's a hangover from other stuff that was cut. So some people have complained, why does Biggs just show up? But in the original cut of the movie, he talks to Biggs, and Biggs I've seen the sequence because they put it online as a deleted scene where Luke and Biggs are on Tatooine early in the movie, and then Biggs goes off, and it sort of reestablishes Luke's desire to get off the planet, and also increases your understanding of his frustration that Biggs represents his friends that have gone on to do stuff with their lives. And the idea that at the end of the movie he gets into the rebellion and Biggs is there is nice, but it actually works reasonably well without the opening scene of Biggs, because you get Luke establishes most of his friends left years ago. So when you meet Biggs in this cut, it gives you more context for that, reinforces it, and also makes you care more in the end. So the Biggs one is actually, I think, a really good choice. I don't mind them putting the big scene back into this movie, but the extra special effects, adding random CG monstrosities all over the place, Like the creatures that the stormtroopers are riding, bad. Greedo shooting first, very bad. Stop doing it. McClunky, what the fuck's happened there? I'll never know. I will never understand McClunky. So there, I think, on balance, unfortunately, the changes are for the worse rather than for the better. There are so many subtle ones people wouldn't even realize as well. One of the things they changed was there used to be like an orange glow underneath Luke's speeder, because on the original they didn't have the budget to properly edit out the wheels under that thing, the framing that kept it up. So what they did was they just rubbed Vaseline on the negative of the film under the speeder, which created like this orange glow that also covered up the wheels. And I think they just called it like the force field, and it was just, the idea was, we'll explain that as when those things fly, they create an orange energy field under them, and that's what that is. And they've edited that out since. I don't mind that. That's fine. If you want to clean up a special effect in a way that's kind of subtle, most people won't even notice it. That's fine. But going in and making these huge fundamental changes, like adding big CGI monstrosities, the sequence where they reach Mos Eisley and they go in,
that's awful.
Oh, it's so bad. It's embarrassing.
I don't mind the cantina, because it's almost like it's not as egregious, because, you know, it's a darker scene and like it's less obvious what's new and stuff. But like the big monster that gets in the way of the speed racer and stuff, like almost anything outside is so noticeable and appallingly done. My big one, though, the one that just I find so unbelievably distracting, is the speed in which the doors shut. Like, any door just going zoom, because it just doesn't match the rest of the technology and what we see, and like it's so weird, and it's so I just find it so distracting every time.
My big one is when they do CGI ships during the dogfights, I think, because the dogfights are done with such care and such precision with the models, and they feel so real and so tangible, and the movie has a really distinct look, and that is ruined every time there's a big CGI X-Wing, which there are only one or two shots of them, I think, in this movie, but I think the next one, or maybe Jedi, one of the movies, they inserted a lot more shit in these special editions. And I do think it's about time Disney stuck the original cuts out there. They own them.
Well,
they own Fox. There's no excuse now.
They own Fox. They've got them, but the thing is, it's their ace card, man. Like, it's their big, like, it would just, Disney Plus would be swamped with people just intrigued and wanting to check them out. Like, I don't know, maybe it's, obviously we've got Bad Batch, because the obvious thing is today, May the 4th, you know, and it feels like they didn't do it last year. They put Rise of Skywalker up. This year they've said they're going to put Bad Batch up. You know, maybe you do that as well. I don't know. Maybe you do it near Christmas. But it just, they're holding on to this huge ace card. And it's like, why aren't you utilizing that?
Yeah, because I don't think I'd ever watch these versions again, if I'm honest. Because while I do like the big scene, and I don't mind small touches like removing the force field under the speeder, 90% of these ultimately I think are bad when I actually analyze it. And particularly, the most egregious is obviously the musical number at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, which we'll get to. It's horrendous. And I understand George's impulse to be like, it's something I wanted to do but didn't get to. Still, don't do it. It's a bad idea. Stop doing it. It stands out. It doesn't work. It looks different. It feels different. It's you can't recreate that magic of those original movies and make it function. Please stop fucking with these things.
In general, it's like it wasn't a failure, George. Like, it was like the biggest movie series of all time. You don't, at the time, you don't need to tinker with it.
It just feels like it. So it's a man who was like told for years that this was not going to work, who made a bunch of changes at the behest of the studio, had to make a bunch of concessions because the budget was fraction. I mean, for those who don't know, this movie was originally supposed to be like an $11 million budget. I think they let it grow to $18 million. But that's fucking nothing. That's so little money. Even in the 70s, that was not a lot of money to make a movie with. You know, he obviously had like a real bee in his bonnet about it not being his vision. And I think a lot of it actually manifested with I think he was really excited when he wrote the cantina scene about like, oh, it's going to be this room, it's going to be full of all these weird aliens, and it's going to feel... And yeah, in the final product, and particularly the original cut where it's still got the wolf man in it, this one still has the devil, the literal devil in the cantina, but the original one also had a wolf man because they were just taking costumes from all over the shop, I think, to make this work cheaply. I think the disappointment of that hurt him so bad. Because he had this vision in his head of this cantina scene that the movie doesn't actually make up to it, to the point where it's supposed to seem threatening, but when you first walk into that cantina, it is just kind of funny. You know, it's so I get it. I understand where his impulse has been born of, but Georgie boy, back the fuck off. I mean, he's not got any. He can't touch it now. Obviously, his last revenge was McClunky. his last edit was adding.
What is McClunky? I don't know what that is particularly. What is that?
So, for some reason, when these went on Disney Plus, they, in the Greedo scene, before he shoots, he goes McClunky and shoots, which he's never done before in any previous version, even the normal special editions. No one knows where it came from. Disney haven't answered questions as to where it came from. It almost feels like right before Lucas handed over the keys to the kingdom, he made one last change to the masters just to fuck with people. It's
so weird.
Honestly, it's so strange. McClunky. It's just I will never understand McClunky to the day I die. It's a recent thing for those who don't know, who haven't seen it on Disney Plus. If you watch it on Disney Plus, randomly Greedo says McClunky, and that isn't in my DVD versions. It's not in any version I've ever watched in my life until I got hold of Disney Plus.
Wow. Yeah, I just think release it. That leads us nicely. You got any other thoughts before Triv, Dan?
Yeah, I mean John Williams' score. I wrote this in capital letters. I wrote at the very top of my notes. John Williams' score is so fucking good, so fucking good, so fucking good, so fucking good. Binary Sunset, so fucking good, so fucking good. I wrote those exact words.
I think you should have been watching the movie, Dan, instead of spending the entire 2 hours writing that long ass sentence. But
yeah. Fair. I mean, how good is that fucking music?
Yeah.
I couldn't stop myself. It was just so fucking good.
And again, I think something that is in a modern world taken for granted. One, because other films have great scores, but two, again, most people watching this for the first time have already heard that music. But there's a reason it hits you every single time, because it's incredible and it's a huge part of the movie. And I think what made it a success, because, you know, like you say, the special effects, the whatever, weren't, you know, they were mind-blowing, but, you know, they were a struggle to put together. It didn't have the budget they wanted it to. The fact that the music says this is epic makes it feel more epic.
Yeah. And what's crazy is this movie exists without two of the most iconic pieces of Star Wars music as well. I mean, the Imperial March and Yoda's theme are not in this movie, and so there's still two incredibly iconic. Like, this movie has some of the most iconic music of all time. The Binary Sunsets, the main theme itself, like, are just so powerful and so fist pumping and so good. And John Williams is like, oh yeah, I've also created two more masterpieces for the next movie. Don't worry about it though. We'll get there. Like, it's stunning, absolutely stunning. So yeah, John Williams deserves all the awards for this music. It's some of the best music ever committed to any film ever. And the Binary Sunsets moment, Luke looking off to the twin suns, is visually and musically just one of the most incredible moments from any film. And it every time I watch it, the swell of love and nostalgia I feel for these movies it's like they just can switch it on at that exact moment.
Just looking into the sunset, thinking, you know, these two could get burnt, and I don't think I would even care. If anything, it'd give me an excuse.
Yeah,
I'd do anything to get off this planet. Right, come with me and do this. No, I've got to buy some wires. No. Right.
Yeah, so it's just incredible. And from a story perspective, it does really create an emotion. That moment, I will say, it's one of my favorite moments in the whole film, because you really understand Luke wistfully looking off looking at those twin sons, knowing he's destined to just live and die on this planet, but wanting so much more. Between the music and the visuals and Mark Hamill's performance, that moment really does come together as something quite special. It communicates quite a lot with with no words, and that's pretty special.
And I jest about I know it is played beautifully, and I think you can make arguments for like. He turns, I think, in my head, I like to think he partly turns Obi-Wan down at first because he's fucked up with the droids and, like, he knows he's going to upset his uncle and he doesn't want to upset his uncle.
Right.
There's a flaw in that fan explanation in that it ties him emotionally to his outed uncle. But yeah,
I think it's a little bit of both. I think he does feel a bit of responsibility, but I think Obi-Wan kind of nails it when he says, like, that's your uncle talking. Like, he's had it drilled into him that, like, the farm is his life and it's that important and he's got responsibilities that he has to keep up with. And I do love the movie's got that brilliant hint, he has too much of his father in him. That's what I'm afraid of, which is such a good line because I think its original intention was to be like his father went off and, went crusading and got himself killed. But obviously the context that plays now with the backstory filled in, that line is now one of the most ominous lines of the whole movie. The idea that one of the reasons Luke has had that drilled into him of stay here, mind your own business, is quite simply not because Owen wants to keep the kid locked down and in a box, but because he knows what Luke's potential is for pain and damage and hurt. If Luke was to get out there and learn the ways of the Force, he could easily turn out like his father. That's how that plays now, and that's again, unintentional but brilliant part of movie design, and works really well.
Yeah, for movies that have spawned so many years and so many sequels, it's amazing how much does tie. Because even, like, I know a lot of people criticise, well, how come Obi-Wan, I think, again, this was in the Honest trailer, how come Obi-Wan doesn't remember R2-D2, da-da-da-da-da. I've always read that as Obi-Wan Kenobi being playful and trying to keep some of his cards close to his chest about whether he knew the droid or not. When he's like, funny, I don't remember owning a droid. And technically, the droid was Anakin's. So, I think it's amazing. And obviously, it's not necessarily a credit to this movie. It's a credit to the work of the later kind of writers and creators and stuff. But it's amazing how much of it does link in very well.
Yeah, agreed. I did make a note about there's a blurry blue pixelated mess that looks vaguely like a woman, and Luke still goes, "She's beautiful." that always amused me. Even as a kid, I was just like, "But you can't really see her." Just find that really odd. We've already talked about that. I do think the shot of Luke's Kentucky Fried Relatives is pretty upsetting for a family film. They shoot it wide, so your eyes don't find them initially, so you don't get to really see the detail. But if you go into that shot knowing where they are in the frame, it's two smoking skeletons. It's pretty grim. It's not subtle,
The arm getting chopped off and by the lightsaber is also pretty violent.
Yeah, it is. I think that one's kind of, again, because it's like the sort of like cheesy special effects inside the cantina. It almost plays a bit more funny than gory. But yeah. By the way, Robot Chicken did the best interpretation of that scene for comedy, where in their version of it, the guy who gets his arm chopped off is not saying any of the things the other guy is saying. Like the initial thing he says to Luke is like something like, "I like your hair," and then the guy is like, "He doesn't like you," and he's like, "That's not what I said. I don't like you either. What are you doing?" And then that's the guy that gets his arm chopped off.
Element as well is another great example of an underappreciated joke. Like, all this violence happens and the canteen is just like, okay. Yeah. It just goes back to normal. And again, what feels like an incredibly modern joke.
Yeah, it does. You're right. Absolutely right. It's a shame that George Lucas's ability to do that sort of sense of humor seems to have vanished between this and the prequels. But yeah, maybe one day we'll get to those. Because I also watched those as a kid and loved them as a kid. Well, I say loved them. I was obsessed with them, even though I knew they weren't very good. Like, the prequels fascinated me. I really liked having the rest of the world explored, basically, even though I knew the movies were not good. So the cantina scene, I've already wrote about that. The reinserted Jabba scene is awful. I do enjoy that Boba Fett gets to show up in this movie now, but no, thank you. This is a joke. This is a thing that's been pointed out a million times, but I will never quite get over. You don't believe in the Force, do you? Because Han's response to that should be, and neither did you 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I wrote that in my notes. There's so many great quotes in this movie. Who's more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him? That's no moon, that's a space station. Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? I wrote so many of these down. The one I wrote down that was really one that maybe doesn't hold up as well as those was from the Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight, which is now I am the master. And Obi-Wan responds, "Only a master of evil, Darth."
Yeah. Can we
dialogue.
talk about the fight actually? Because the fight has
Yeah.
a reputation for not being that epic and being quite slow. But I think there's one or two moments that are like quite clunky, but the majority of it still feels pretty epic to me. It still works, I think.
Yeah, I think the problem is at that point Lucas still had the idea that the lightsabers were physically heavy, so you had to wield them with two hands like a broadsword. So in the real world, there are like different kinds of swords, and if you think of like medieval times, you think of these big giant broadswords that the guys wielded with two hands because they were so heavy. You needed all your body strength to be able to lift and swing them. You know, like big sort of heavy sort of like hammers. Like they were a force of they were all just about force, and the weight led into that. And then there are obviously your more nimble swords that you could do with like one hand that you could sort of like very quick movements for. George's initial concept was that they were like heavy broadswords, and that changed years later. But that's why in this movie, at no point does anyone like hold them one-handed. No one like spins them round. It's always two-handed, and that is part of I think what leads to them feeling very different to other fights. It also doesn't help that obviously Obi-Wan, played by Alec Guinness, is old here, so therefore he can't be doing backflips and stuff, which is stuff they get to once younger people do the fighting in later movies, and even in Empire, Luke is sort of like jumping about and a bit more athletic with it, and that's because he's younger. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's a great fight at all. It feels very clunky, but it also doesn't even feel like a proper fight. Like it feels like the premise is Obi-Wan's just holding him off until Luke gets there because he knows what needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think you do feel, and who knows? Maybe this is because I know it and stuff, but you do. I think you can feel. I think even someone watching it who'd never seen anything would feel the weight of these two people fighting. Some of the less corny dialogue, Alec Guinness and his reactions. Mm-hmm. It feels like two people who know each other going at it, and I think it plays. I don't think it's this appalling unepic thing. I think it works.
And the moment I do think as well is really important on Luke's journey, and the idea, I don't think I'd ever seen anything like it, where like the hero lets himself, one of the heroes essentially lets himself be killed, almost like to teach a lesson to the younger one. Like he knew his time was up, and that by passing on at that point, it would set Luke on the path to righting things. The idea that he somehow knew that, it's all very mysterious, and you sort of, years later they sort of scienced the Force a bit. But when I first watched this movie, I was like, wow, like he was so in touch with the Force. He almost could see the future. He knew exactly what moment he needed to die to put Luke on the path he's putting Luke on. It plays less like that, I think, once the Force gets a bit over-explained in later movies. But when I first watched this movie, I was like, what a crazy cool idea. I'd never seen anything like it. A hero essentially sacrificing himself for something so sort of opaque and sort of like vague, like as a concept. But then you see it working, and also there's the line, I'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, meaning I'll be able to guide Luke to your destruction. It works so well. But again, in this movie, it plays so mysterious. So the fight isn't really about the action; it's about all that. Like that's quite complex.
Yeah, completely.
I don't mind. So what I'm saying, I suppose, is it's not that the fight isn't a bit clunky, because it is, but the in-universe explanation is that at that point the swords are supposed to be heavy, and Alec Guinness was supposed to be old, and was old. But the actual story reason that you do it that way is because that's not what the fight's about. It wasn't about backflips and cool moves. It was about Obi-Wan choosing to just hold off Vader just long enough to let Luke see him die. So that Luke
and let them get back to the spaceship.
Yeah, and let them get to escape. He's buying them time. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's how can anyone complain about that? Like, I agree. It's clunky. I agree. It doesn't match the other fights, but like, that's not what it's trying to do. It's got a different goal. It's not trying to be not trying to be an action sequence. That's why it's mostly just them talking and circling each other. They don't do a lot of actually swinging those swords. So yeah, there you go. Other notes. I did just say that the trash compactor sequence in general, the rescuing the princess trash compactor sequence is my favorite sequence in the movie. It's a really creative idea for a sequence. I remember as a kid being genuinely frightened they wouldn't make it out of the trash compactor, which is such a funny idea now because obviously they're the heroes of the movie. 7-year-old Dan was a fucking dumbass. But I wanted to talk about that scene just from a great anecdote that Mark Hamill's told on a couple of late night shows. After that scene, they filmed. So one of the first ones they seen. One of the first scenes they filmed. One of the first filmed they seen was the scene directly after the trash compactor. And Mark Hamill, who'd read the script, goes, "Wait a minute, I've just come out of the trash compactor in this scene, right?" And George is like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, shouldn't my hair be all like messed up and wet from the trash compactor? Shouldn't I look like I've just come out of one?" And Harrison Ford,
especially as he got dragged underwater.
Yeah, exactly. And then apparently Harrison Ford turned to him and said, "Kid, it ain't that kind of movie. If they're looking at your hair, we're all in big trouble." And Mark Hamill, who's a great voice actor, whenever he tells that story, does a pitch perfect Harrison Ford impression. And according to Mark Hamill, every time he's told that story, Harrison Ford has contacted him shortly after and been like, "Kid, I don't sound like that," in this same voice. So good. Yeah, that's what I love
the relationship between those two leads. I will say with the trash compactor, that is an appalling bit of added CGI. The eye of the monster that sort of pops up and it's
I think that's always been that. I think that's stop motion, I think.
Oh, okay. Oh, fair enough.
Think. I could be wrong.
Why not change that then?
Yeah. Let me check. I'm sure that was always there.
But that monster, why? That's a weird. Like, I loved that scene as a kid. Still do now. It still gets me kind of in the nostalgia. But like, the monster takes him, drags him under. There's a long sort of couple of seconds of Leia and Han just looking at the water and not doing anything.
Yeah.
And then it just lets him go. And my fansplanation now is the monster could sense the walls were about to compact, or had like been in there for a while and avoided getting crushed before, so was looking to do the same. I don't know. But it is weird, isn't it? It's a bit like, does that just exist for like another exciting thing to happen? Like, the walls caving in and there being no escape is enough. Like, it is,
but I must admit, as a kid, that captured my imagination. The idea that some creature lived in the trash compactor. Like, how did it get in there? Where did it come from? It's huge. So did it come on small? Is it like a parasite that sneaks onto your ship quite small in your trash and then grows inside there and you've just got to deal with it? Like, I don't know. That captured my imagination. It doesn't really add a lot to the scene, I don't think. Maybe some extra peril, but not necessarily necessary extra peril, because there's enough peril, as you pointed out. But I must admit, the creature, which I just looked it up, it's called a Dianoga, and there's a drawing of what artists believe the rest of its body looks like, and it's fucking terrifying.
Cool.
It did capture my imagination as a kid, the idea that something could live in the trash in this world, and seemingly just be like, that's just there. Are they feeding it when they throw trash down there? I don't know, but I was fascinated by it. So it gets a pass from me, just again for creativity. But that sequence is great. Particularly, I love the moment where they're cheering and C-3PO mishears the cheering as cries of pain and thinks they're all dying, and he's like, "Oh no, I wasn't fast enough. They're all dying." That's a really funny joke. Again, the movie hitting the nail on the head with the gags. It's a really great moment. I have a criticism of the film. Well, not a criticism, a nitpick, Chris. And I wanted to ask you for your opinion on this. You might have a fansplainy explanation for this. But they escape the Death Star. and they're being chased by a couple of ships. Han and Luke shoot them down in a pretty cool sequence. Has one of my favorite lines, which is "Don't get cocky, kid." Love that. And the Family Guy reinterpretation of that was "Don't get penisy, kid," which is beautiful.
Great joke. Simple, beautifully done joke.
The Family Guy Blue Harvest sort of episode where they, in 45 minutes, retold Star Wars but with Family Guy characters is very good. Family Guy has been hit and miss over the years for all sorts of reasons. That is excellent. It's 45 minutes. If anyone hasn't seen that, it's a brilliant comedic look at this movie. The robot that has a bad motivator literally has bad motivation. It's a really funny interpretation of Star Wars. Anyway, I'm not even going to spoil it. There's so many great jokes in it. I could talk about that as much as I could talk about this film. It's brilliant. But I have a question, Chris. So they're escaping. They shoot the ships down, and Leia goes, "They're tracking us. It's the only explanation for our escape, being so easy." And Han's like, "You think that was easy?" So Leia knows they're being tracked.
Yeah.
She knows. Why do they go back to the Rebel base if they know they're being tracked? The reason the Empire and the Death Star show up at the Rebel base to blow it up is because they track her, which she's aware of. Why did she not go somewhere else, change to another ship, and then fly to the Rebel base?
Because, and this is a stretch, but because the ultimate goal is to destroy the Death Star before it does any more damage and destroys other planets. You can't destroy the Death Star unless you've got the Death Star. So the way to guarantee you're going to have the Death Star to have the chance to destroy it before it does any damage is to bring it with them.
Yeah, that's dumb. They risk their entire base on that. Because if they fail to blow up the Death Star and they're not at the Rebel base, like if they just wait till it's, known to be somewhere else, it's big. You ain't going to miss it, the Death Star. It's not going to be too hard to find. Then they can always take another shot at it. But if it blows up the Rebel base, then they've never got another chance of blowing that thing up again.
My second explanation is it's not that kind of movie, kid.
Yeah. I mean, that is the answer. I did also make notes about the scene that Harrison Ford is masterful in, and it's the scene where he fucks with Luke because he realizes Luke's kind of into Leia. It's so perfect. For those of you who remember, they're in the cockpit, and Luke says, like, "Oh, what do you think of the princess?" He's like, "I'd rather not think about the princess, to be honest with you." And Luke goes, "It's good." And it's really subtle from Mark Hamill, but Harrison Ford just gives him this sly glance and sort of like smiles and then goes, "Well, though, she is like," and he starts like talking about what he likes about her and then goes, "I don't know, do you think a princess and a guy like me?" But he doesn't mean it. He's just fucking with Luke. But it's because it's Harrison Ford, it's just mwah, it's beautiful.
But Mark Hamill's reaction as well of just immediately no.
They're both great in that scene. But Harrison Ford particularly sells that. I think it's another funny moment and just awesomeness from him. Let's see. We've talked about that. Oh, I did write down that the stakes and goals weirdly feel personal in this movie and not galactic, even though they are galactic. And I wonder how they do that. I guess it's because we see the world through Luke's perspective. We see how small the world he comes from is, and then he gets drawn into this wider world. And that makes it feel personal, even though actually we are talking about the fate of the galaxy.
Yeah. Because even like... Because actually, I've criticised a lot Luke getting over his aunt and uncle. Leia gets over everyone she knows dying pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, her whole planet is blown up in front of her.
The whole planet is blown up. But I guess they do always connect it to, Leia, the whole planet, Luke, his aunt and uncle. So maybe that's why it feels personal. And I think it's because it's all so specific, and the film has never felt the need to go again like a bad version of this would do now. This thing could go around and destroy the galaxy in 5 days. It doesn't do that. We've got to destroy it, and it's coming for us. It's all so methodical almost, and I think that keeps the stakes very real. It's about the specifics, in the same way that whether you like it or not, Ant-Man is about the specifics. Ant-Man isn't about the wider world. Ant-Man is, I'm going after this villain who in this moment wants to do this. And I think that's the same with this movie. It's do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost the lack of showing us like the Senate making decisions and the lack of like just focusing on a couple of soldiers dragged into this war rather than getting into the politics of it. Actually, I think makes it better, which is ironic because obviously like so much Star Wars stuff since has gone the opposite way as a result of I think the prequels kind of created a situation where the politics of Star Wars becomes quite important to the story. And I think in a weird way, one of the reasons Mandalorian works is because it is back to basics. It's not about the wider world anymore. It's about one guy struggling. And I think that's why the prequels and to some extent the sequel trilogy struggle, because I think this movie and it even weakens towards the end of this series. You know, by Return of the Jedi, we're looking at a lot more wider scale things. But keeping this so focused on just a small story of some people dragged into a war, you know, a smuggler and a farmer get sucked into this wider situation, and they don't even have that much personal stake in terms of sorting out the Empire. Leia does, but Han and Luke are there for different reasons, you know, personal ones. Whereas that gets lost, I think, in later Star Wars stuff. And I think that is what works for me about The Mandalorian, is it captures that again, because it is a guy trying to get by and do things that he wants to do, and they line up often with what the good guys want to do, and then he gets dragged into stuff. But he's not there because of an idealized like political belief.
And it's a shame really, because so much of it, especially in the prequels, is execution. Because the core conceit of the ideas, like the core conceit,
the ideas themselves in the prequel often are good.
How the idea of following the prequels being the story of how the Emperor managed to twist and turn everything to his advantage and take power is both a great idea and, let's be honest, in these days, a fairly cautionary tale. Like ahead of its time. But it's execution. But I think
it lacks that personal touch.
Yes, yeah. Whereas this has the personal touch, but is also so much. The wider world is built, but it's not about the wider world.
Yeah, that's why I wonder if would the prequels have been better if they'd made Anakin the main character. Like Anakin's just a little boy on a planet, and the Jedi and the war come to him. So the movie doesn't start showing us Jedi fighting for Naboo and the Trade Federation, but instead they crash on the planet and he ends up getting sucked into it. Sort of put the focus on Anakin. Would that have been a better movie? Because then you've got a character with no personal stake in these things getting dragged into them again, and that might have made them feel a bit more human.
Yeah, and then Trilogy 1 is about war making Luke the hero, and the prequels is about war making Anakin the villain.
Right,
you know?
Exactly. Yeah. That which is I do think one of the things that makes Force Awakens work is that they go back to that. It gets lost as the trilogy goes on, but that first movie is, Daisy Ridley's character Rey is just, this random person and that's why I really respected Last Jedi, I suppose, because that obviously puts a real stamp on you're no one. And that's I guess why the third one feels so egregious, because it goes back to the that idea of like, oh, you're a big player in this big galactic war, which I like less. It makes it feel less personal. But anyway,
even Finn, who is a stormtrooper, the actual story they're telling with The Force Awakens in his character is very much about him.
Yes.
And not, do you know what I mean? Not the wider stormtrooper of it all. And, Jesus, at least they kept telling stories about Rey. But anyway, separate discussion.
Very separate discussion. I do love that everything in this movie is dirty and old looking. Something the franchise has kind of lost and regained over the years, depending on the project. C-3PO, for example, is filthy through most of this movie. And I don't think I've ever necessarily spotted that before, but like that's great. He's genuine. He's like smudge marks and scuffs all over him until the end scene where he's all cleaned up in the hall. And while we're on that, my final note, Chris, before we hit the trivia that I wrote down was justice for Chewie. He's right there. Give him a fucking medal. Confirmed. George Lucas didn't see Chewie as a person. He's a racist.
Leia deserves a medal as well, not just giving out medals. She, watching that scene back, I'm like, Not just Chewie. Why? Like, this involved a lot more people than just Luke and Han.
Yeah. I mean, look, I
so
get it.
weird.
Luke was the one who fired the bullet that took out the thing, and Han obviously facilitated that. But yeah, come on. They were also, I suppose, responsible for getting the plans that allowed them to even put that plan together back to the Rebels, I guess. Marvel Comics tried to explain it, though. I wrote this. I noted this when I was doing my research. So Marvel Comics adapted the movie. They got the contract to do Star Wars comics way back when. And their explanation in the text below was, Chewbacca, of course, will have his own medal, but he'll have to put it on himself. Few space princesses are that tall.
Oh, gosh. Jesus.
There you go.
There's literally steps in front of them. Fuck off with that explanation. Chewie, nip down a level, will you, mate? There you go, buddy. Like,
or, could you kneel? Just kneel. Kneel. You're very tall. I'm sorry if that feels degrading, but if you just kneeled, I could put this medal on you. Cool. Here we go. Anyway.
I don't even think it's justice that he gets, people weeping at Rise of Skywalker, like, Chewie gets his medal, from his dead friend. Like I would have preferred them going, oh yeah, no, he also got a medal, we just didn't see it.
Yeah, that would have been better. Because the idea that Leia in later life went, shit, we never gave Chewie a medal. When on my deathbed, I'll make sure I sort that out. It's ridiculous. Anyway, should we hit the triv, Chris? Because we've been talking for a very long time, and there's a lot of it. Can I just say that this has been the most difficult one to research of any movie we've ever done on this. There is so much trivia for Star Wars.
I assumed.
It's one of the longest trivia pages I've ever seen. It took me 3 hours to go through.
Jesus.
Yeah. My original plan was to watch the Empire of Dreams documentary and talk about some of the stuff in that, about how this movie got made, because this movie has a really depressing backstory. And while I do cover some of that in this triv, I tried to trim out the stuff that is very commonly known. So for example, I don't think it's in here that the name R2-D2 came because when Lucas was editing American Graffiti, he was doing the music with the editor, and the editor told him to get Reel 2, Disc 2, but he asked him to get R2-D2. And Lucas liked how that sounded, and he was writing Star Wars at the time. That's quite commonly known. That's a very repeated piece of Star Wars trivia. So that sort of thing, the reason I'm saying it is not because I'm trying to sneak it in. I've tried to cut out the trivia I think is very widely known. There is some of that stuff because some of it's just too good to ignore. But yeah, this trivia was really hard to narrow down. So there's a lot of it. I am sorry. I'll try to get through it as quick as I can. I think a lot of it is interesting, though. I tried to keep it to the most interesting ones. So, shall we begin? Yeah, because we're already... so I'm not going to cover the production in the sense of we already know the studio thought the movie would flop, that they had no money, the shoot was a nightmare, the budget made it all very difficult. That stuff, if you want to know more about that, the Empire of Dreams documentary, I think that's what it's called, is great. It's actually a bit biased because it is produced by Lucasfilm, but it is a very good documentary. And it's a lot of the source of my early knowledge of Star Wars as a kid. Well, I say as a kid. As I got to become a teenager and I got more interested in it even, those documentaries that came on the DVD set were very helpful. It's really good. Anyway,
yeah, they were great.
I think they're on Disney+. He shrugs. I think. It's like a 2 or 3 hour documentary. It's crazy. But I think it's all on Disney+. So there you go. So George
Empire
Lucas...
of Dreams certainly is, but I thought that was a newer one. But I might be wrong.
I think Empire of Dreams was the... was the extra disc on the 2004. So on the DVD release from 2004, there was a fourth disc with like a 3 hour documentary on, a 2.5 hour documentary called Empire of Dreams. And when Disney Plus put the Star Wars movies up, they put that with it. And it actually originally aired on television, aired on the A&E network. Huh?
Yeah, there you go.
You learn something every day. There you go. I thought it was made for the DVDs, but there you go. Anywho, so George Lucas was so sure that this movie would flop that instead of attending the premiere, he went to Hawaii with his good friend Steven Spielberg, and that's where they came up with the idea for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then they found out that Star Wars had become a success. He didn't even attend the premiere. That's crazy to me. The actors actually found George Lucas a little bit difficult to work with in that he wasn't grumpy or anything, but he was kind of. There was often talk. He was very down a lot of the time because he felt a bit. This was like his dream project and it wasn't working out how he imagined. But he was also apparently uncommunicative towards them. So he wasn't ever rude, but he was very depressed seeming, very low energy,
yeah.
and he wasn't very good at explaining what he wanted them to do. His directions in general were either to ask them to be faster or more intense. That's all he usually told them when they asked him for direction, because he was more interested, I guess, in the filmmaking side of it than the actor managing side of it. And at one point, when he temporarily lost his voice, the crew actually jokingly gave him a board where on one side it said faster and the other side it said more intense. Some of the
awesome.
trivia... some of the trivia goes into, I'm not going to talk about it, but some of the trivia goes into like how the crew made it, the crew and cast made it like a running thing to try and make George smile because he was so miserable during the making of this movie. I don't think he was ever like abusive or like grumpy like to anyone directly, but I just think it was like it took its toll evidently on George. So yeah, the skeleton that C-3PO passed belongs to a creature called a crate dragon, which we've seen recently in The Mandalorian. That artificial skeleton was actually just left in the Tunisian desert and reportedly still lies there to this day. So during the filming of Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, they went back to Tunisia for some shoots and actually visited that location and saw that the skeleton was still there. I think that's super fun. In the early drafts of the script, R2-D2 could speak standard English, and he had a rather foul vocabulary. So then, when they removed all of R2's English speech and put bleeps in, they left in all of C-3PO's reactions. So when C-3PO is acting shocked at R2, or like, what are you doing, R2? Like, it's because R2 just told him to fuck off.
That's brilliant.
I love that. So the scene of Darth Vader's TIE fighter spinning out of control was actually added quite late in the production at the insistence of George Lucas. Other members of the film's crew were opposed to this shot, feeling it was too much of an obvious setup for a sequel, which at the time was generally considered to be a cash-in move, doing a sequel. I think in a weird way, Star Wars kind of brought back the idea of legitimate sequels, not cash-in ones, like where you're actually telling more of the story. But Lucas insisted on its inclusion regardless of the crew's concern about doing it. So
that even as a kid, I noted that was a very clever move to keep Vader alive.
Yeah, because
even as a kid, I was like, oh, cool, like that's good storytelling.
Yeah, because Tarkin goes up with the ship, right, and you're sort of sad because you're like, I've lost my villain, I've lost a villain. But having Vader, the two things that are clever about that, and Nadia pointed this out, he's quite hands-on, Vader, and that's quite good because often, like these sort of villains, they'll send their minions out but never do the fighting themselves. The fact that Vader gets in a TIE fighter of his own and gets out there amongst it, considering his importance, is good, and is another accidental thing that tells us who he really is. Because earlier in the movie, Obi-Wan described him as the best star pilot in the galaxy. And then we have Vader showing flying skills, and again, I suspect accidental. Maybe Vader I don't think he was intending it to be Luke's father at this point. So I don't think that was. I think the original plan was for him to have just killed him. But yeah, I think that ends up working out accidentally in the movie's favor as well. So there you go. According to Harrison Ford,
completely agree.
During the making of the movie, he and Mark Hamill would usually fool around and not commit to their work. But whenever Alec Guinness was on set, they behaved much more professionally. Yeah, he brought some pathos with him. This one's genuinely one of my favorite pieces of trivia, and I'd never heard this before. Well, George Lucas, unless it turns out that when I do sit down to watch Empire of Dreams, this was included, and I'd just forgotten. But I genuinely didn't remember this trivia at all. When George Lucas was filming in Tunisia, the Libyan government separately became very worried about a massive military vehicle parked near their border. Consequently, the Tunisian government, having received threats of military mobilization, politely asked George Lucas to move the Jawa sandcrawler away from the border. So the Jawa sandcrawler nearly started a war between Tunisia and Libya.
Amazing.
I love that. I love that there was military mobilization happening because this movie was filming. Another good piece of trivia.
Even like the fact that they were in Tunisia, like how often was that done in the 70s? Maybe a lot. Maybe that's me just.
No, I feel like that was a big. And I've skipped a bunch of Tunisia trivia because Tunisia's was a nightmare. Tunisia hadn't had a rainstorm in 55 years. and they had one the first day of shooting on Star Wars. And then about 3 weeks in, all of the sets and stuff that they left out got hit by a sandstorm and got ruined. So like this, and then so this shoot was a misery. And also, a lot of the actors hated working in Tunisia. They didn't mind the studio stuff here in England, but the Tunisia like location shooting for Tatooine was a real nightmare. Like, it was too hot. No one was happy. There wasn't really a huge budget, so they couldn't even like particularly the actors in the big suits, like anyone in a stormtrooper costume, anyone in like Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker in C-3PO and R2-D2, Peter Mayhew in the Chewie suit. They were all. Oh no, because he did Chewie. Oh, you do see Chewie on Tatooine. Oh no, but only inside. Oh, maybe he got away with it. I think he got away with it, because I remember reading a piece of trivia that he only did a couple of weeks filming on this. But yeah, it was a nightmare for everyone. So there was a lot of trivia I've skipped about that. Harrison Ford actually didn't learn all of his lines for the intercom conversation in the cell block, so it would sound more spontaneous. So that is why that sounds so natural. When he's like, no, everything's fine here. How are you? Is because he intentionally didn't learn the exact phrasing. Prior to release, George Lucas showed an early rough cut to a group of his movie director friends, and according to Lucas, this version still contained a lot of like stock footage from old war movies instead of the special effects shots, and it reportedly didn't make a lot of sense. And this is, I guess, before they re-edited it for story reasons as well. When it was still full of all the unnecessary exposition. And most of the people in the room basically asked him what he was thinking, because and Brian De Palma apparently called it the worst movie ever, and nearly everyone, including Lucas, felt it was absolutely destined to be a complete flop. The only person who disagreed was Steven Spielberg, who predicted the film would be the biggest movie of all time and make $1 million. Apparently, according to Lucas, everybody in the room looked at Stephen like he was insane. And then when he visited the set of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is the movie Stephen was making while George was making this, George Lucas was convinced Close Encounters would outperform Star Wars at the box office. Spielberg disagreed. So they had this, essentially a bet, a gentleman's pact. They'd been friends for a long time, since uni. They basically traded 2.5% of the profits of each other's movies. Spielberg accepted the deal, thinking Star Wars would be a huge hit, and still receives 2.5% of the profits from that movie to this day. Lucas receives the same from Close Encounters, but I don't think I need to tell anybody that Close Encounters did not perform as well as Star Wars in the box office.
I mean, Spielberg got the better deal.
He did. And look, I love Close Encounters. That's definitely going to be on Rewind Reviews at some point. I loved that movie. That movie captured my imagination so much as a kid, but it's not Star Wars, let's be honest. So Spielberg, once again, proving himself to be quite a genius. This is a bit of a gross one. Mark Hamill held his breath for so long during the trash compactor scene that he broke a blood vessel in his face, so subsequent shots are all shot from one side only.
Oh, wow. Blimey.
That's pretty gross. It's credit, but gross. The movie was on a very limited budget, so the American cast members and crew, including Lucas, had all decided to save money by flying coach to England rather than first class. When Carrie Fisher's mother, Debbie Reynolds, heard about this, she called Lucas and complained about how insulting it was to her daughter that he was making her fly coach. But Fisher was in the room with Lucas when he took the call, and after a few minutes, she asked if she could talk to her mother. When Lucas handed her the phone, she simply said, "Mother, I want to fly coach. Will you fuck off?" and hung up. God love Carrie Fisher.
That's amazing.
That woman is a fucking treasure.
Yeah, she was amazing.
That's a great... I love that piece of trivia so much. When 20th Century Fox attempted to distribute the movie in the US initially, fewer than 40 theaters agreed to show it because everyone was so convinced this movie was going to be a flop. Everything about it was telling everyone this isn't going to work. The fact it was a science fiction movie, from the marketing to how weird it sounded, and everyone was like, nah, this is a disaster. So Fox threatened any cinema that refused to show this movie and said, you won't get the rights to our next big blockbuster, The Other Side of Midnight. Now, if you're thinking, Chris, I've never heard of The Other Side of Midnight. Yeah, correct.
It goes Star Wars, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The Other Side of Midnight. That's the order of recognition.
So yeah, The Other Side of Midnight is a movie that Fox put out that same year that everyone was convinced would be a huge hit, and obviously, again, I don't need to remind people how successful Star Wars was, but I will point out that the stat is that Other Side of Midnight made less than 10% of what Star Wars did, and the idea that the studios buckled and put Star Wars on because Fox threatened to pull The Other Side of Midnight, which I believe was a Susan Sarandon movie, is hilarious to me. That continues to make me chuckle. Apparently Luke's line, "I can't see a thing in this helmet," was not scripted. Mark Hamill thought they'd stopped rolling and genuinely was saying that to Harrison Ford. I love it. That's great.
That's brilliant.
This is a weird one, and I put this in because I have questions about George Lucas. George Lucas decided that you don't wear underwear in space.
Yeah.
He told Carrie Fisher that they didn't wear underwear in space because you become weightless, and when your body expands, your bra doesn't, so you get strangled by your own bra. So as a result, in this whole movie, Carrie Fisher's breasts were sort of taped down with gaffer tape. Because the costume didn't permit any lingerie to be or underwear to be worn underneath. It's written as lingerie here, which I think that's a weird word to choose. She joked later, as we all know, there is no underwear in space. And then when Lucas had said you get strangled by your own bra, she responded with, "I want it in my obituary that I drown in the moonlight, strangled by my own bra." And apparently, when she passed in 2016, several articles covering her death did indeed include that sentence.
It's weird and icky and like, oof, the whole underwear in space Lucas approach to that, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it can't not feel a bit leery.
Yeah.
And what's funny about it is there's a part of me that does also think this really weird, obsessive guy that had come up with all this lore and backstory that he then had to remove from his movie to make it make sense genuinely might have really gone like, no, I've decided there is no underwear in space. Because the outfit he puts her in this movie is quite, like, it's not particularly revealing, is it? It's a white sack
True.
that he puts her in. So there's a part of me that does think maybe he is just a really weird, nerdy guy that really had made a decision about bras in space not being a thing. But yeah, I also see another interpretation of that choice, which makes George Lucas in a worse light, I think.
Yeah, given how like detailed he'd been about other stuff, it's not beyond the realm, but equally, you'd like to think most people would go, I'm going to let that one slide, though, for the comfort of the actor playing the part. Yeah. And not seeming like a massive pervert.
Yeah, I would agree. So Peter Cushing found that the boots that came on his costume extremely uncomfortable to wear because they were very small on his feet. So he only wore them in a few different shots where his feet could be seen. In all of the shots, Tarkin is wearing a pair of fuzzy slippers.
Right.
As an actor, I would have struggled to find Tarkin threatening wearing fuzzy slippers, but hey ho.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it certainly takes the edge away, doesn't it?
It does. Apparently, the Chewie suit stank for the rest of the film shooting after they did the trash compactor scene, which is one of the first things they shot with him. So.
Oh.
There you go. According to Mark Hamill, studio executives were actually quite unhappy that Chewbacca had no clothes and attempted to have the costume redesigned so he'd be wearing shorts. Wow, that was a proper Ron Burgundy moment where a spelling error not a spelling error, an autocorrect error. I just said it. But yeah, they tried to make Chewie wear shorts. Don't think that would have worked.
No, it wouldn't have. But that's one of those things that you probably wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? If they had done it, you wouldn't have necessarily thought about it. You wouldn't have known that it wouldn't have worked, but I'm glad they didn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if with a good designer you could make it function, but yeah, it's such an iconic look. I'd struggle to see a way that would work personally, but yeah. If you could take a guess, Chris, how many minutes of screen time do you think Darth Vader has in this movie? It's 2 hours and 4 minutes. The movie, so 120 odd minutes in it. What you thinking?
I don't think he's in a huge amount. 28 minutes, half an hour.
It's a very reasonable guess. It's actually 12. 12 minutes of screen time.
Jeez, really?
Yeah, isn't it incredible the character leaves such an impression with such little screen time. 12 minutes.
Do you think it's because he's scattered across the whole movie?
Partly that, and I think partly because the character is such a big, sort of memorable character that you sort of you think of him more, even though he makes such an impact in his short time that creates the impression of more screen time than he gets. I think that's probably part of it. But yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, it must help that it's diced throughout the whole film. But yeah, 12 whole minutes in total. You wouldn't have guessed.
And he's our first iconic character that we meet as well.
Yes.
So in your head, it's like, oh, there's Darth before we even see Luke, Leia, etc.
Exactly. Yeah. I've seen those shots of like Luke on the surface using his binoculars and saying, "But I think there's a battle happening out there." It's not good. I'm glad they cut that. I'm glad they didn't include that stuff.
Yeah. Oh no, that would have been awful.
Yeah, those scenes are out there, but like not worth putting in the movie at all. I'm glad they never did that when they re-edited.
Yeah.
So I could do a whole section. I'm not going to. I'm just going to do a summary. But there could be a whole section of trivia, Chris, that we could spend 45 minutes talking about all the ways in which Alec Guinness didn't respect this movie at all.
But I do love that he came out and said things like, it essentially came out and went, look, I never have to work again. Like, I could choose the movies I want to choose because of this movie. Yeah. So what have you cut it down to? Because there's some great stuff. I was looking into that last night.
I mean, the man, like, I kind of love him. Because it's so open. Like, there was it doesn't seem like there was ever an attempt to, like, disguise it. He was very open about it, to the point where he was writing letters to a friend, and these letters have been published, where he says, I was offered a movie at 20th Century Fox. I might accept if they come up with proper money. Starting in March, science fiction, which does give me pause, but it is directed by Paul Lucas, who directed American Graffiti, which makes me feel like I should do it. It's a big part, fairy tale rubbish, but could be interesting perhaps. Then he sent the same person a letter while on the set, and he says, new rubbish dialogue reaches me every other day on wedges of pink paper, and none of it makes my character clear or bearable. I think, thankfully, of the lovely bread, which will help keep me going until April. I'm assuming there was nice bread on set that was available to him. And I love how dismissive this is. I must off to the studio now to work with the various people. I'm skipping a little bit here. And he talks about your fellow countryman, Mark Hamill, and Tennyson. Wait, that can't be right. Ford. Ellison Ford? No. Well, he's a rangy yet languid young man who is probably intelligent and amusing, but God, oh God, he makes me feel about 100. And then he adds, oh, his name is Harrison. Ever heard of him? And it carried on over the years. There's rumors, there's mixed reports that some have reported that he asked for his character to be killed off, so he wouldn't have to carry on saying these rubbish lines. He later mentioned shriveling up every time that someone mentioned the movie. And in one particularly famous incident, or infamous incident, a young boy asked for an autograph, and he proudly told Guinness that he'd seen the movie over 100 times. Guinness gave him the autograph on one condition, that he never watches Star Wars again. He also claimed in later years that he threw away any Star Wars related fan mail without opening it. And people have said this isn't true because how would you know what was about Star Wars before you opened it? But yeah. He hated the fact that he was mostly remembered for Obi-Wan Kenobi, despite the fact that it kind of revitalized his career a little bit. Lucas has said he made the decision to kill off Obi-Wan, sort of contradicting his story as well. But according to Lucas, Guinness was less than happy that his character was dying. So, Lucas even went as far to say Guinness was less than happy his character was dying earlier than expected, and seemed to enjoy his time on set. And Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, and Mark Hamill have all said previously as well that he was very patient on set and very professional and respectful to the rest of the cast and crew. But yeah, he made no secret he didn't like the dialogue. It repeatedly referenced that over the years, and it particularly came down on that. Also, wasn't a big fan of science fiction. Here we go. Of the final movie, Return of the Jedi, he remarked that he found it staggering as spectacle and technically brilliant, but very noisy, but also warm-hearted. The battle scenes at the end go on for 5 minutes too long, and the dialogue is excruciating, much of it is lost in noise. But it does remain a vivid experience. So yeah,
but didn't he also get he got hold on, because I saw this.
Yes, I know. Yeah,
he about the prophet.
Yes,
yeah.
So he was reluctant to accept a sort of normal fee for this, and Alec Guinness, something spooky about him. I think there was a famous actor. I think it was it Dean Martin that died in a car crash? Not Dean Martin, maybe Marlon Brando. Did Marlon Brando die in a car crash?
James Dean.
James Dean. Brando, that's who I'm thinking of. James Dean. James Dean died in a car crash, and when he first bought that car, he met Alec Guinness, and Alec Guinness refused to get in the car and told James Dean that car was bad news, full stop. And then he died in it. So Alec Guinness is a weird, spooky force man anyway. And something makes me think that he must have known, because he took a percentage of the film, which the studio gave to him because they knew it would be a flop and he'd get basically nothing. He agreed to take 2%. And on the day before the film was released, he offered another 0.5% to Alec Guinness to thank him for his work. And
Lucas did, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, Lucas rang him and said, we'll give you another 0.5% for your work, and particularly because you changed some of the dialogue, for improving the dialogue. Now, that was worth millions in the end, obviously, but... Alec Guinness didn't know that at the time. But what was funny is, so Lucas calls him before it's a hit and says you're getting an extra 0.5%. And about 3-4 weeks later, he called him and said, so about that 0.25%. And Alec was like, that's not what you said, because it now was very obvious how much that was going to be worth. So yeah, 2.5% of the money this movie's ever made, and that continues to be the case. So, and his family are set for life. They'll never, his estate is going to be very wealthy. Yeah, he was a very smart man. How he foresaw that would be the most profitable thing for him to do, I cannot tell you.
I just looked up the James Dean thing. The car was a Spider, as far as I can tell here. Mm-hmm. When Dean introduced himself to British actor Alec Guinness outside the Villa Capri restaurant in Hollywood, he asked him. Sorry, say that again.
I was just saying, yeah, this is it. This is the story. I'm glad you found it, because I could. Go on.
No, I know, but there's a detail that makes it even crazier. A restaurant in Hollywood. He asked him to take a look at the Spider. Guinness reportedly thought the car appeared sinister and told Dean, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." The encounter took place on September 23rd, 1955, 7 days before Dean's death.
Fuck off.
That is crazy.
That is
at least that's what Wikipedia says. Like, that is nuts.
That is nuts. Wow. I've heard that story a number of times and it always weirds me out. I don't know. There's something spooky about Alec Guinness, man. I've still got a handful of truth to make it through. So if this is interesting so far. This isn't bad. I'm worried this is too much. But is this okay?
No, the truth. No. It's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, I had a lot to choose from, so there was obviously good that I got the selection. The cast and crew's nickname for David Prowse on set was Darth Farmer. Because famously, obviously, Prowse on set had his Bristol accent, and honestly, the fact that he didn't know he was going to get dubbed over is shocking to me. But there you go.
Yeah, have you seen the footage? It's nuts, isn't it?
It's incredible. If anyone hasn't seen it, and it's this is one of those famous pieces of trivia I kind of didn't go to, but it is worth mentioning because you should look it up. So David Prowse is a very tall gentleman from Bristol in the UK that was hired mostly to be the physical presence of Darth Vader because he was a tall man, and to be honest with you, a few different cast members report being cast for their height and nothing more. Peter Mayhew was cast as Chewbacca because he was sat down when they were interviewing him, and when he stood up, George Lucas went, "You're hired." And reportedly, Kenny Baker as well was hired purely based on his size because you had to be very specific dimensions to fit inside of the R2 unit that they'd done. Fair enough. Right. So yeah, Prowse was hired to be the physical presence of Darth Vader. But if you've ever watched the footage with his heavy British Bristol accent, and if you don't know what a Bristol accent sounds like, don't worry, that's fine. Check the footage out though. There's a clip
some
of the best.
In
it's
the
so much comedy.
Trailer. Yeah, it's nuts.
It's the funniest thing. The footage is out there, and it sounds so ridiculous. The idea that when the cast and crew are calling him Darth Farmer, he didn't know he was going to get recast voice-wise, which he didn't, apparently, and he was very upset about it. Although he did come back for the sequels, so I don't know.
Well, I imagine the sweet money truck might have had something to do with that. But
100%. And look, from all accounts, he seems like a lovely guy, so maybe he did it or something. I think he passed recently, didn't he? Was that recently?
Yes, he did. Yeah. I think he did.
Yeah, so absolute hero there.
Well, James Earl Jones was quite recent, wasn't he? Is he passed? Am I imagining that, or maybe I'm thinking of the original actor?
Because James Earl Jones is in Coming to America that came out a week ago. So I don't think James Earl Jones
I must be thinking of the original actor then.
You must be thinking of David Prowse.
Yeah, maybe I just saw the headline and this it was James Earl Jones, or I've just got it confused in my mind. But James Earl Jones, very much still alive. Great news.
Yeah, and David Prowse sadly passed November last year, very recently. So
right.
Yeah, okay, that's where that's come from. Yeah, so he passed pretty recently, and but from all accounts, he was happy. He went to a lot of fan conventions. He wasn't particularly bitter about it in the end, but yeah, he apparently wasn't happy initially because he wasn't aware he was being replaced. And I still stand by, he kind of should have guessed. But anyway,
yeah, completely.
Peter Cushing seemed to have a great time and was really sad that he didn't get to come back for the sequels. Although he has often made like little jokes about it, commenting, "I've often wondered what a Grand Moff even is. It sounds like something that flew out of a cupboard."
Isn't it crazy, like, that he wished he'd come back for the sequels, and little did he know that after his death he would be digitally put in a sequel.
Isn't that such... Yeah, you're right. That is so strange.
Like, he wouldn't have even been able to, like... probably wouldn't have even been able to like imagine that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, you're right. But I mean, it makes sense he's not in the sequels. He obviously dies in this movie. But
yeah,
yeah, you're right. A prequel would later come along that would put him in it. If he could have even imagined such a thing, that they were going to digitally put him in a movie after his death. That's crazy. You're right. If you go back in time and tell someone that blow that bloody mind. So this is where we confirm that George Lucas didn't know what he was doing. As much as he sometimes claims. In 2010, George Lucas sent Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, the executive producers of Lost, a letter congratulating them on the show's conclusion and letting them in on some potentially facetious secrets about the development of Star Wars. He said, "Don't tell anyone, but when Star Wars first came out, I didn't know where it was going either. The trick is to pretend you've planned the whole thing out in advance, throw in some father issues and references to other stories. Let's call them homages, and you've got a series."
I mean, there are a lot of parallels, aren't there, between Lost and Star Wars?
Yeah, it's great. His original title for the movie was The Adventures of Starkiller, Episode 1, The Star Wars. So, he didn't have the clearest idea.
No.
Apparently, George Lucas also on set had a lot of battles with the cleaning staff. Because they kept cleaning and buffing his sets, and he wanted them dirty. They would the production crew were making them dirty, and then the cleaners were coming in at night and hoovering them and buffing them and cleaning them up again. They actually rolled the R2D2 droid like in dirt and like a bunch of stuff like that. But I just love the idea that he was coming every day like, guys, stop cleaning my sets.
It's meant to look like this.
What was that, sorry?
It's meant to look like this.
Yeah, it's I wanted it dirty. So apparently, Industrial Light and Magic spent most of the production period in utter chaos, creating special effects that had never been created before, and they acted to the point where they actually blew half their budget on 4 shots that Lucas then rejected.
Wow.
At the time, before the movie went over budget, they spent around $5 million of the $8 million budget that they had, which is one of the reasons the budget then got expanded because of how much money Industrial Light and Magic spent. So they spent half their budget on shots that Lucas did not want in the movie. So
Made it back though, didn't they?
Yeah, I'd say they did. Yeah, I reckon this movie. Have we checked? Do we know if this movie made money? We'll have to have a look. So, last couple. The filming of special effects sequences at Industrial Light and Magic Studio was at one point interrupted by a representative from a local camera operators union insisting that Industrial Light and Magic hire union camera operators and not, just their own staff who are not part of the union. Someone then programmed the newly developed Dijkstraflex motion-controlled camera to perform a complex series of moves that ended with the camera being pointed in the very faces of the union reps. At this point, the union reps were told, send someone who can operate that, and they pointed to the Dijkstraflex, and the union reps promptly left and were never heard from again. The camera was so complicated, union cameramen could not operate it. And once they proved that, the unions vanished. So there you go. It's fun. We got a couple more. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just saying, it's amazing how many like films and TV shows of that time, like there's always stories about unions and stuff, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think over the years they've put more. I mean, it was all very new back then in terms of like the way the technology works and understanding that yes, you might have a cameraman that could be suitable to work on a camera, but this isn't a normal camera. Like understanding that when technology advances, it shifts who's trained to do a job or not. It just feels like over the years they got a better understanding of that, which is why these issues don't crop up so much anymore. Because if they invented a new piece of camera technology now that required a specific kind of person to operate it, the unions wouldn't be going, hire one of our camera operators. So, they would understand before they even showed up that was the case. So I guess there's just an assumption, a sort of dialogue that's occurred since that sort of, led to them sort of knowing that by default. Last couple bits of trivia. Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher were all taken aback when with George Lucas's decidedly lack of dialogue skills. They often stood up to him about the poor dialogue, and he allowed the actors and actresses to basically improve their own wording for various parts of the screenplay's dialogue, which explains the Harrison Ford not learning the speech in the thing and then sort of repeating it to make it more natural. So that also explains why Lucas gave Alec Guinness the extra funds for helping improve the dialogue. He must have adjusted many of the lines as he went as well. So there you go. I've already said this, but just to repeat, contrary to popular belief, I didn't explain it very well. Greedo shooting first in the remastered version of this movie was not George Lucas's fault, but the MPAA insisted he put it in there in order for the movie to keep its PG rating. That's a good one. I'm going to hold for 1 second while I step away. Sorry, Chris.
I'll Phil with my own piece of trivia. Although I've got Dan answering the door. So my own piece of trivia: Star Wars.
I'm back.
Is cool. I had nothing.
I'm so sorry. Basically, we got a delivery coming today. It's something that we've had trouble having delivered here. And the guy's ringing, and I'm like, Nadia will answer it. She doesn't. She must have her headphones in. I'm like, oh shit, we can't miss this again. We've kicked up such a stink about this thing. It has to arrive, so I had to get it.
That's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm just appalled at how badly I just had nothing to say. I think it's because you left me on, so I could hear you as well. So I was just like,
yeah. No, I'm really sorry. I'll edit that so
That's
it's a
fine.
little bit more listenable for the audience. But yeah, there you go.
No, don't worry.
So yeah, so it was the MPAA whose name I forgot earlier. In sort of shoved that. So shoved that down. Lucas's sort of they made him had to do that to keep the rating. So there you go. The last piece of trivia. In terms of the X-wing and the Y-wing and TIE fighter, these are actually terms used by ILM to distinguish the fighters, and were not actually ever spoken in the movie. But they do. Those titles then got incorporated into the sequel. So it's actually the Industrial Light and Magic guys that gave the X-wing, Y-wing, and TIE fighter their names.
Oh, cool.
And apparently the names became popular with the public even before the sequels aired because of the toys and a making of special that aired that used those titles. Apparently
Cool.
the staff also nicknamed the Millennium Falcon the Pork Burger, but this one did not catch on. So there you go.
Why?
God, that's a lot of trivia. I'm sorry, so much.
It doesn't look like a pork burger.
Yeah, I don't. There's a part of me that just wonder where that came from, but there you go. I guess. Yeah. And that one gets named in the script, so there's no real reason to make up a nickname for that one. Like the other ones, the X-wing, the Y-wing, they don't get named in the script for this one. So I don't know why you would So I know why you would come up with a title for that to refer to it, but I really don't understand the choice.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Have you got a question, Dan? We've ran long. Is there a listener question?
We do have a listener question from a listener called Will, and he says, "I've got." I've read the wrong comment. He's saying he's got tons, but he doesn't want to ask too many. But he's asked before, but I put it out there, and he responded, "If you could only watch one film and one TV show for the rest of your life, what would those things be?"
God.
I was thinking maybe something that's for TV shows, something that there's a lot of and it's very easy watching. Something like maybe The Office.
Yeah, or Doctor Who, because you've got different types of genre.
Yeah, Doctor Who's a really good shout.
But I don't know if I don't love it as much. I love it, well, not now. But yeah, the very fact that there's episodes I've not seen suggests, but there is a lot of it. But I do have more affection and feel I could watch The Office more than Doctor Who. But Doctor Who has more genre, different types of, some episodes are comedy, some episodes are thriller. If you're only watching one thing, do you go with your heart or do you go with your brain? Because my heart answer is probably The Office. My brain answer is Doctor Who.
Yeah, Doctor Who's thrown a wrench into it for me because that is a really solid choice. Because of the variation, it'd be something like that. It'd be something like Doctor Who or like X-Files or something that has a lot of scope in the stories it covers.
Because that's it's got a lot of scope in the 10 years it's been on now, but that's not even Doctor Who as a show includes the older stuff, and presumably in this scenario, you're being given all of that show, so you'd be seeing shit that no one's seen for years as well.
Yeah. I think you've actually done. It would be either. I think coming down to it, I think it's either Doctor Who or Star Trek, because there's so much Star Trek.
Same
too.
logic.
Star Trek's another choice. Maybe I'll just to be different. I'll go Star Trek because I think you're leading Doctor Who, and there we have. And that
I don't know. I'm part of he's leading The Office.
But
then there's a I'd miss sci-fi, I'd miss drama, I'd miss other sitcoms, and I'm getting all of those things in there with Doctor Who.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's somewhere between The Office and Doctor Who. If I had to choose right now, maybe Doctor Who. But I think if I thought about it more, I'd go with my heart and go The Office.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere between Doctor Who and Star Trek.
Movie? No idea. God, only one movie.
Yeah, it'd have to be a fucking good movie, wouldn't it? Because there's a part of me that thinks maybe this, but I've already seen this so many times. Like that, you know what I mean? Star Wars is a movie I have seen 100,000 times. Like it's honestly, it's again one of the movies I've watched the most in my life. So it's hard. It would be hard to choose that now. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's funny. I glanced at the question before we got to it, but I actually should have thought about it more, so I had an answer ready.
Yeah,
Like I glanced at the
really
question before we
don't know.
recorded.
The
You know what?
movie-
It might be something like the Truman Show, maybe, because that is very watchable.
Yeah, see, my mind is because you kind of want, with a TV show, you want something that you can sit down and, put on and watch and it feel different and be different and that you can dip in and out of, which makes something like Star Trek, The Office, or Doctor Who a good choice. With a movie, you almost want a movie that, because, being realistic, even though it's the only movie you can watch for the rest of your life, you're not gonna watch it every day. Do you know what I mean? So it's not even about repeat viewing. So if you look at it on what's a movie that every time I watch, I get into and get swept up in, but also a movie that I'm not then hankering for The Empire Strikes Back or Back to the Future Part 2. Da, 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 da. Do you know what I mean? What's a movie that doesn't leave you wanting the next part of the story? The choice that comes to my mind immediately is Die Hard.
Yes, that is a great choice.
It's just every time I watch Die Hard, I get swept up in it. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
It plays. I think it's a perfect film. And yeah.
God, you might be right. Yo,
Yeah,
know
do
what?
you think
No, I've got the answer. My answer is Groundhog Day.
Yeah, I've heard that before in questions of like if you could watch one movie on repeat for the rest of your life, but
No, and not
Yeah.
just for that obvious, like sort of like that is obviously a part of why you answer that, because it's kind of funny. But also, when you were describing a movie that no matter when you put it on, you manage to get pulled in. I always love watching Groundhog Day. It always pulls me straight in. I'm always so invested. I love watching it. Yeah, I think for the same reasons you chose Die Hard, and for the extra comical reasons of watching a show about something being on repeat, because it'll be on repeat. For both reasons, I'm going Groundhog Day. So I'm going. I guess I'm going like, depending on your choice, I'm either going Star Trek or Doctor Who. So like if you choose The Office, then I'm going Doctor Who. If you choose Doctor Who, then I'm choosing Star Trek, just to keep it different.
I'm going The Office.
All right,
The Office pairs better with Die Hard. I'm going The Office and Die Hard.
And I'm going Doctor Who and Groundhog Day.
There you go. Because I don't ever, and I don't know if it's just because the show is so shockingly bad now, but I would now, if you were to say to me, if I was to go downstairs and Jess went, you have to choose, we're either watching Doctor Who or The Office, I would say The Office 99% of the time. So I have to go with my
but I'm
heart
sort
and
of
go
doing
The
that.
Office.
I'm doing the big, the trying to think big wider and think like, yeah, it's been bad the last couple of seasons, but everything prior to that was right on my street.
Oh yeah.
So,
Oh mate, like as I've said all along, Doctor Who's a better choice. Doctor Who is a more sensible, more logical choice. So that's why I'm flitting. And if you asked me tomorrow, I'd probably go Doctor Who. But in this moment, if you're forcing me to choose right now, so you can choose, I'm going Die Hard in The Office.
Boom, there you go. And I'm going for Doctor Who and Groundhog Day. So thank you for the question. If you would like to ask a question at the end of one of these podcasts, all you have to do is be a patron. We put out a little post every now and then for Ask Our Patrons for questions, random nonsense that we can talk about at the end of a podcast. And if you'd like to be a person who asks a random question, you just go there and give as little as $1 a month, and you can do that. But you also get access to this podcast and our Avatar podcast, Analyzing Avatar, 1 week early. You also have access to the occasional bonus podcast. We have one up called Nothing But Claps, which is an insane but really fun podcast where Chris asks me a bunch of questions, basically interviews me, but all the questions are related to clapping. Like, when was the last time you visited Clapham? What's the hardest you've ever clapped? It's as mad as it sounds. It was super fun to do, and I'm really pleased how it turned out, and I'm looking forward to, at some point soon, adding to that, doing episode 2 where I ask those same questions of Chris and get his answers. So very excited about that. So yeah, that you can become a patron. You can get us all the other usual places: twitter.com/nothingbutstatic, or without the G, or you can get me at Dan Doolan or Chris at C Billingham. You can also go to youtube.com/nothingbutstatic UK, and again the Patreon is patreon.com/nothingbutstatic. You can also obviously get a hold of our podcasts, Nothing But Static, Steven University, Analyzing Avatar, Fringe Observers, over Analyzing the Garden Wall. They're all available on audio platforms, whichever one you prefer. So if you if you Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Amazon, whatever you use, you can find us on there, and they all have their own rating and review systems. Feel free to do that. So give us a poke, give us a thumbs, give us a star, give us a heart, give us whatever review system they have on there. The more you do that, the more they see people engaging with it, the more they tend to promote us to other people. So if you want to help us in a way that isn't the Patreon, where it's actual money that we're demanding of you, you can help us out by quite simply reviewing us on any of those platforms, or giving some of our videos a like on YouTube, or subscribing on YouTube. So that leaves us with the question, Chris. So we've wrapped up Star Wars. We're happy with Star Wars, but we've recommended. Great film, absolute classic, huge influence on both of us, and I think a lot of filmmakers have since had a massive impact on Star Wars, and it's obviously had a huge cultural impact, Chris. Now, what do you choose next, Chris? Because it's your choice now, and you could you possibly follow it up with a movie that has had such a similar impact on both us and culture? I'm not sure you can, Chris. What are you choosing?
Dr. Dolittle. No, obviously Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
We gotta. Yeah,
I was hoping.
You gotta do it.
Yeah, I think it's good to do this trilogy together, and I'm excited that next week Chris has selected Empire Strikes Back, because I think that's the way to do it. And also,
I think it's in a way it's the discussion prior to rewatching them this time, based on when I rewatched them at Christmas, did the classic Star Wars Die Hard combo, which we talked about on Nothing But Static. The Empire Strikes Back discussion was almost the one I was most excited to talk about, because there's a fascinating discussion for me on, it's an amazing film. Is it an amazing Star Wars film? Is it not? Do you know what I mean? I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there's something really interesting to it's often cited as the best one, but it actually got a lot of stick in the press at the time. Like, the reviews initially and the feedback initially from fans wasn't great. And
I think for me, and it would be interesting if I feel this way rewatching it again, but I think there's a flaw that I struggled to get over with the film. And people don't rarely talk about the Empire Strikes Back flaws, so
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it with a more critical eye, because it is my favorite Star Wars film. It's always at the top of my list when I think about it. For me, it's like as much as this one is great, it's the one that sort of manages to both expand the lore and still feel like a very personal story, whereas the others that I like for expanding the lore, they tend to lose that personal story. We talked about that in this podcast, so it'll be interesting to see if that holds up as much as I've always sort of said it is. Because again, I watch these movies at least once a year, if not more, and I've done that since I was 7 or 8. So I've seen this movie hundreds of times, because when I was a kid, when I was a kid, I watched them a lot more than once a year. I can tell you that right now. But every other weekend for a good while. But it's a movie that I haven't watched with an eye for criticism in a long time, or ever maybe. So it'll be really interesting to see how I actually think the movie holds up as a movie when I try to be a bit more objective about it, because I was surprised at some of the things I noticed about this film watching it this time that we've talked about, the structure and stuff, and the choice to some of the odd choices or nitpicky stuff, like about Leia if she knows they're being tracked, or even just how long it takes this movie to really get going. There are definitely criticisms you could levy at it, and I think if that's true of this, that's definitely got to be true of Empire, right? So
yeah, completely.
And it was funny because last night Andy was like, "You should watch Empire." I'm not going to watch it before we review A New Hope. I don't want to review New Hope knowing that Empire is flawed in some way. So yeah, very excited. And I guess if you want to hear, I suppose actually one thing I didn't say, if you want to hear that right now, and it's, if May the 4th you're listening to this on, iTunes or Spotify or any of the audio platforms, guess what? Head over to the Patreon. That Empire Strikes Back is already up. You can listen to it right now for as little as $1 a month. So if you enjoyed this discussion and want to hear the same thing for Empire, then you know where to go. Yeah, patreon.com/nothingbutstatic. Well, great time. A bit of a long one. Check it out. A bit of a long one, but I think Star Wars, it was bound to be, wasn't it?
Yeah, completely. God, yeah, this was always gonna be lengthy.
Yeah, as soon as I saw the trivia page, my heart sank, Chris. You know when you're on a big long web page and the little icon that shows you with the scrolling? You know how when it's a short page, that's quite big because there's not much scrolling in the computer. I've never seen it so small.
Yeah. I didn't even I just wrote this out as we're probably going to be in this room for 3 hours minimum.
Yeah, which has been the case. We're at 3 hours and 17 minutes in the room, and we've now recorded for roughly 3 hours. Where actually this recording is now at 3 hours. So yeah, bumper episode. Might be the same next week for Empire. I can't necessarily. We'll see. I guess that's just a big question mark on that. I don't know because we talked a lot about Star Wars in general this week as well, and I feel like
and we also there's less making of trivia. I imagine.
Yeah,
potentially
for sure. Yeah,
Alec Guinness's reaction to the film is probably not going to come up next week.
Precisely. So yeah, I think potentially the next one will be shorter, but that is whenever we say that is the kiss of death. It'll somehow be longer.
Very true.
Whenever we promise the next thing will be shorter, it's always longer. Or if we start a podcast by going, this will be a quick one, that is when we are wrong. So anyway, thank you so much everyone for listening. I hope you had a good time with this one. It was a big episode. It's been on our back burner for a long time, and I'm glad we finally got to do it. And I had a good old time. I had a grand old time. Need the toilet.
Yeah, me too, man.
But I had a grand old time. So yeah,
good times.
Thanks very much for everyone for listening, and we'll see you in a week's time. Chris, take it away.
I'm Chris Billingham.
I'm Dan Doolan.
And this review has been rewound.